As the war unfolded, a storm roiled within the hill of stones inside Profound Jade Cave. A purple lotus enveloped Han Li as he held his hand in an incantation gesture. An exceptionally thin sliver of purple flames trailed into the huge light sphere in front of him. In addition to Han Li's own flames, black, white, yellow, and green glacial flames shot into them, all of them coming from other cultivators that were sitting in their lotuses. At the moment, these 5 cultivators had pale complexions and tired faces. The surface of the light sphere was wrapped in wandering flames, where a single silhouette was sitting cross-legged. No longer an old dwarf, Master Arctic Dragon now appeared to be 3 meters tall, and his age regressed to a man of 30 years at the peak of his health. However, his face still contained a strong resemblance to his former self. It was truly an odd sight to behold. At the moment, pure immense essence pierced into his shoulders, abdomen, and nape in the form of sparkling silver blades. Through they were embedded halfway, they didn't leak even a drop of blood. But what was most noticeable was the several various-colored light worms emitting from his half-closed eyes. The flesh from his body seemed to be a layer of them, as they continuously burrowed in and out from his flesh. Each time a worm emerged, Arctic Dragon's body trembled and agony briefly appeared on his face. Under closer inspection, one would astonishedly discover that the worms were condensed from the different glacial flames, and each time the worms re-emerged from his skin, it became smaller. Once the worms shrunk to a certain extent, the light worms scattered in a bang. Immediately after, a strand of flame of an identical color would condense into another worm of light and burrow into Arctic Dragon's body. The scene continued repeatedly. Also, there was an astonishing sight occurring right outside his dantian. There was a 3-inch large nascent soul that resembled Arctic Dragon. It had its hands clasped in an incantation gesture, and its body was covered in layers of flickering blue flames. The light worms seemed to ignore the blue flames and parted through them, only for them to enter through the nascent soul's nose and leave through its mouth a moment later. The nascent soul was expressionless, and the flames pulsed from its body, adding an air of mystery. After an unknown amount of time, the man's body violently trembled, and he suddenly opened his eyes. Han Li and the others seemed to have been given a sign, and they all switched incantation gestures at nearly the same time. The huge, light sphere above them collapsed into the various flames that originally formed it and were recalled to their original owners, and the lotuses that surrounded each of the cultivators dissolved into air. Afterwards, they took their medicine pills, and they took out their spirit stones before entering a meditative rest. This had continued as a cycle of several days over a dozen times over already. Each time, they would drain a majority of their magic power, but fortunately, they were rich with spirit stones and medicines, and they were able to restore their power after only half a day. When Han Li and company withdrew their glacial flames this time, Arctic Dragon closed his eyes as if meditating for the spell. As time slowly passed, the old woman eventually opened her eyes and examined Arctic Dragon still sitting within the sphere of light. She let out a deep sigh. I truly admire fellow Taoist Arctic Dragon for being able to bear through the pain of the cleansing of 5 flames. Although we are meticulously controlling the power of the flames, the pain must be worse than death itself. It seems you've cultivated a body forging technique of some sort, or your body would have already collapsed. It would be impossible to survive relying on spiritual sense alone. The azure-robed middle-aged man soon opened his eyes and smiled. Lady Long is truly knowledgeable. Senior Martial Brother Arctic Dragon didn't cultivate such a technique long ago. His body is far more durable than that of other cultivators. No wonder, the gray-robed monk added with a solemn expression. However, we've nearly done everything we can, having already purified his essence several times with our flames. I figured that his body and nascent soul have already reached their limits, and we are soon approaching the final stage. In 2 days, we'll find out if it is a success. On the side, Han Li calmly stated, but the profound jade glacial chi inside the formation seems somewhat lacking. We may need to halt it temporarily to replenish it. Within the sphere of light, Arctic Dragon yelped with surprise. I didn't expect fellow Taoist Han to understand the technique to this degree. That's right, we'll need to gather more of the profound jade glacial chi than what we sealed in. Han Li's heart trembled and looked in his direction. At an unknown time, Arctic Dragon had stood up, and his figure was slowly floating upward from the condensed glacial light. The 5 blades piercing into his body had disappeared at an unknown time, leaving not the slightest injury behind. His face betrayed an enchanting smile. Han Li chuckled and casually answered, "Really, that was only a guess." While Master Arctic Dragon took out a blue robe from his storage pouch and draped it over himself, he continued, "Brother Han already reached that level of understanding. How do you feel about my odds of success in breaking through this bottleneck? Are your thoughts any different than mine?" Maintaining a calm face, Han Li casually replied, "You must be joking. The secret technique is your discovery. How can my understanding be greater than yours?" Arctic Dragon chuckled and said nothing else. With his body still floating in the air, he flicked his fingers and several spell seals shot out, fading into the light barrier surrounding them as soon as they appeared. The spell formation let out a series of strange drones before suddenly coming to a stop. The 5 pillars of light disappeared in the blink of an eye, and their respective cultivators floated down from them. With the barrier gone, the storm of glacial light swept in from the outside, but the cultivators were already prepared. They once again enveloped them in glacial flames. In the coming day, I will make slight revisions to the spell formation. Then I'll gather back the glacial chi. Take this opportunity to rest as I still need your help. If we truly succeed, I will agree to any of your requests, so long as they are within reason." Arctic Dragon stretched out his arms before saluting to Han Li and the others. He appeared completely sincere. The old woman chuckled. "Do not worry, fellow Taoist Shi. Since we've already come to an agreement, we'll do our best. And if this technique is truly effective in progressing to deity transformation stage, we may try to make a similar attempt one day." The monk calmly added, "If any of us manage to enter late nascent soul stage, there could be an opportunity." Han Li nodded but said nothing. Arctic Dragon wore a satisfied expression and loudly uttered his thanks, then moving on to make a few alterations to the spell formation. Han Li and the other 2 outside cultivators returned to the room of Great Yang Essence Stone to rest. A while later, the azure-robed middle-aged man and Bai Mingxin followed suit. Although they easily restored their magic powers, their spiritual senses felt drained after controlling glacial flames for several days. A day quickly passed. When Han Li and company left the stone room, Master Arctic Dragon was again meditating cross-legged in a sphere of glacial chi at the center of the spell formation. The sphere of glacial chi was several times larger than the day before. It appeared he had done his due diligence. He had spent the entire day exposed to the outside. Just as Han Li thought to examine the specific changes in the spell formation, he suddenly heard a strange sound from the monk's mouth. He looked behind him and saw that the monk was flying up in the air with an odd expression on his face. His expression stirred, and he quickly looked around him with a slight change in expression. Not only did the exit to the cavern disappear, but the cauldron used to create it disappeared as well. "Fellow Taoist Arctic Dragon, what is the meaning of this?" When the old woman saw this, she lost her calm and wore a vigilant expression. Arctic Dragon remained completely calm and replied with a smile, "He, there is no need to worry. Because I don't wish for anything to disturb us, I sealed the exit for the time being. I suspect I'll also need to draw on the celestial blue cauldron's power to make the breakthrough." So it was like that. The monk and the woman exchanged a cautious glance. As for Han Li, he narrowed his eyes as he silently looked upward. The atmosphere in the cavern became tense. Arctic Dragon chuckled and spoke to the 3 outside cultivators with a pleasant face. "It seems my actions have been inconsiderate and have caused you to worry. It's fine if I don't use the cauldron. How about I have the celestial blue cauldron placed outside of the cave? I will still have to seal the entrance temporarily." Soon after, he waved his sleeve, and a cauldron wrapped in blue flames flew out from the cauldron and instantly flew a kilometer into the air, arriving just underneath the exit. Although Han Li and the others didn't reveal it, they appeared much more at ease now that the cauldron was far out of reach from Master Arctic Dragon. After a moment of thought, the old woman's tense expression eased and she heartily laughed. "Fellow Taoist Arctic Dragon is quite thoughtful. How could any of us harbor doubts of you? We were only curious. Now that we're pressed for time, let us continue in having you break through your bottleneck." The gray-robed monk stealthily gave Han Li a sound transmission. "Brother Han, what do you think? Although fellow Taoist Arctic Dragon's words hold reason, I have my suspicions. As for fellow Taoist Long, I know she has some relationship with North Night Palace. We'd best be careful." Han Li's heart trembled, and he shot a glance at the monk, seeing that he was smiling at him. As he pondered over the validity of the monk's words, a huge boom rumbled from Spirit Void Hall above them. The entire cavern faintly trembled as if a result from an intense strike. Surprise was faintly revealed from everyone's faces. At the moment, if one was on top of North Night Palace's giant mountain, they would spot a majestic snow phoenix the size of 100 meters. It was circling the barrier, covering the huge mountain, glacial winds whistling past its wings. Its claws held a giant glacier 3 times larger than itself, and it let go. The towering glacier tore through the air as it fell, resulting in a world-shaking explosion. Blinding streaks of white light burst forth as the magnificent barrier began to warp, but in the end, it managed to stay intact. However, the pressure from the attack managed to collapse the more fragile buildings. As one might expect, the huge phoenix was the demon form of the silver-robed woman from before. Her heart still boiled with rage over having the low-grade ice sea demons slaughtered under the effects of the sea calming bell. As a heavenly ice-attributed spirit beast, she could ignore the effects of the outer grand formation formed from glacial mist and make her way directly to the city of ice, allowing to wreak havoc directly on North Night Valley's defensive restrictions. Although her first strike succeeded and threw the cultivators on the mountain into a panic, it also alerted the high-grade cultivators to react. A ring of white light flashed from the demon bird's body. Just as it was condensing another glacier at its claws, a silver streak and a ball of white light flew out from the barrier below, Bayei and the gray-haired old man. But before they drew close, Bayei let out a yelp and sent 2 silver swords forward. As for the gray-haired old man, with a sullen expression, he grasped his hands together and summoned a treasure from his sleeve. It expanded in front of him to reveal a translucent jade bottle. The bottle flickered with light and rumbling booms sounded from it. When the Ice Phoenix saw this, her pair of green eyes glinted and waved her wings, condensing a dozen 30-meter-long ice spears in an instant and launching them at the 2 cultivators. The old man snorted. White light formed from his hands, and he shook the jade bottle in his hand. The bottle spouted a dozen clouds of black and white light that strangely tangled with the spears as soon as they appeared. In a profound display, the ice spears rapidly shrunk upon contact with the light, soon turning them into the size of arrows before the light was sucked back into the jade bottle. When the Ice Phoenix saw this, she blurred from sight and summoned a giant snowstorm in her place. It completely submerged their surroundings. Unwilling to show any weakness, light brightly shined from Bayei and the gray-haired old man as they met the storm head-on. Thunderous explosions boomed from above the top of the giant mountain. The twinkles of light leaked out from the dense snowstorm, but strangely enough, no other elders headed out to assist the 2 cultivators. If they weren't occupied with controlling the 2 spell formations, they were likely fighting other high-grade demon beasts. As the battle fully unfolded outside, Han Li and the others inside Spirit Void Hall were able to sense the pressure of the battles, and they looked at each other in dismay. Arctic Dragon glanced at the exit, and a solemn expression appeared on his face. With a heavy voice, Arctic Dragon said, "It seems the demons have started their attack in earnest. As such, we won't be opening the cavern opening, or we will be disturbed when the time comes and our efforts will become wasted. Since I planned on having you all help us deal with these demons, I don't have the slightest intention of harming you." The monk frowned and slowly said, "Brother Arctic Dragon's words are reasonable, but if we succeed in breaking through your bottleneck, your cultivation will rapidly increase, but we will left exhausted. Being sealed underground for such a long time has left us a bit restless. As the saying goes, wise men make preparations for possible danger. We all have some degree of friendship with your palace, but your words aren't enough for us. Are we supposed to trust our lives with you so easily?" Arctic Dragon replied with a helpless tone, "It is no wonder you are all so careful. If I were in your position, I would feel the same. Is there anything I can do to be more accommodating?" A glint flashed from the gray-robed monk's eyes, and he asked, "How about you hand over the celestial blue cauldron to us 3 outsiders for the time being? We'll return it to you when the time comes, of course. And this way, we'll be able to focus on helping you wholeheartedly." When Han Li and the old woman heard this, they were startled but soon understood what he meant. "Yes, that will do," Han Li readily agreed. The old woman took a moment of thought before eventually nodding. When the azure-robed middle-aged man heard this, he shook his head. "Master Moju, isn't this too much? You should understand the origins of the celestial blue cauldron. It is the magic tool dedicated to cultivating our sect's celestial ice flames. How could we allow it to be taken by others?" The mink's kindly expression, "We are only holding it for a short time. When we leave here, we will return it with thanks. We have no intention of keeping it. Please think it over, fellow Taoist Aoyang." But just as the middle-aged man was about to continue, Arctic Dragon cut him off. "Enough, Junior Marshal Brother Ayang, Master Moju's words hold reason. I agree to this condition, but which of the three will hold the cauldron? When he asked this question, he took a long look at Han Li, then taking a quick glance at the other two. The monk and the old woman both grew quiet. The old woman eventually broke the silence. Since Master Moju raised the condition, he should be the one to safeguard it. I believe he's always been a trustworthy individual. Han Li narrowed his eyes as thoughts flashed through his mind like lightning. He eventually nodded in agreement. With your trust, I will take the cauldron into my care, the monk solemnly agreed. With the three having come to decision, Arctic Dragon wasted no time and pointed to the cauldron high in the air. It spun as it made its way down with its flames extinguished. The monk reacted instantly, releasing green mist from his sleeve. It wrapped around the cauldron and would soon restrain it, serving as a temporary shackle. Although the celestial ice flames could emerge from the cauldron, he had nothing to fear as his own body harbored a flame of extreme cold. When Han Li saw this, he shot over to the pillar of purple light in a streak of light. After some close observation, he gained a near-complete understanding of this technique. However, he would need to see the technique used to completion in order to gain a comprehensive understanding of it. That was why Han Li was willing to stay sealed inside the cave despite his misgivings. He was also confident in his own exceptional abilities and felt he didn't have much to fear. Additionally, Arctic Dragon would have unstable cultivation even if he managed to succeed. There would be time before he could prove a threat. Besides, deity transformation stage cultivators were restricted in the mortal realm. Before she left for the spirit realm, Ling Long left behind a jade slip that dispelled many of his fears of these mysterious cultivators. And just to be safe, Han Li mentally commanded the great Yin True Flame to stealthily enter the spell formation and hid itself under a stone. It succeeded in being undetected. The others each flew up to their respective pillars in the formation. Arctic Dragon then set forth, activating the spell formation once more with flicks of his fingers. Bright mist suddenly filled the air around them, and a barrier appeared around them once more, blocking the cavern's white storms. Han Li blinked and carefully looked around him. Although the activated restrictions were the same as before, there were clear differences in their spiritual fluctuations. As an accomplished scholar in spell formation, he discovered a few of its inner workings as he silently analyzed them. Let us start. If this truly succeeds, I won't forget your kindness, Arctic Dragon said with a deep laugh. He held his hands in an incantation gesture and blue flames quickly ignited from his body, soon turning into the deep blue color of a clear ocean. The sight was completely entrancing. When the old woman saw this, she muttered with a tone of awe, "To think you refined the celestial ice flames to this degree. I fear you've already reached the highest purity of glacial flames allowed in our mortal realm." Those are glacial flames refined to their utmost limit. Han Li's heart stirred, and he took a deeper glance at Arctic Dragon. At that moment, the others began to sit down on their respective pillars, and huge light lotuses slowly wrapped around them. Han Li lightly smiled and sat down as well, grasping his hand in an incantation gesture. Glacial flames spurt forth simultaneous from all the cultivators, but before any of them urged them on, the cultivators let out series of soft incantations. As their chanting continued, the lotuses grew, multiplying their size in an instant. The flames burning from the cultivator's body spread to the lotuses, lighting them up in a dazzling display. Han Li simply felt a trace of a burning sensation from his body, lasting only for an instant as his body drowned in the purple apex flames like a small sun. Immersed in glacial flames, Master Arctic Dragon slapped his hand on the crown of his head. A muffled thud sounded, followed by the ejection of the 3-inch large nascent soul covered in blue light. The nascent soul sat cross-legged with its hand in an incantation gesture. A jade pendant hung from its neck, sparkling with silver light. The nascent soul floated 10 meters above its body and took a breath, exhaling a ball of blue flame. The flame was the purified essence of the celestial ice flame that Arctic Dragon bitterly cultivated for hundreds of years. As the blue flame danced in the air, it formed a blazing shining wheel underneath the nascent soul. Then, the nascent soul slowly floated up out of the sphere of glacial light. When the cultivators saw the appearance of Arctic Dragon's nascent soul, the others immediately moved into action, pointing at the sphere of glacial light, sending threads of their own flames towards it. Before the glacial flames touched the nascent soul, the wheel underneath it suddenly revolved at immense speed. The flames trembled once before gathering in the direction of the wheel. The flames stained the blue wheel with 5 colors in a gorgeous display, leaving who would gaze upon it mesmerized. The nascent soul then softly shouted, releasing a string of spell seals into the wheel of light. Booms sounded out as the flames trembled, shortly detonating one after another. At that moment, the nascent soul's casting rapidly increased, exhausting its magic power in a single breath as it released spell seals without pause. Under the nascent soul's control, the glacial flames ruptured as they began to fuse together into a single lotus. Black, white, red, yellow, green, and blue. The colors of the 6 glacial flames could be faintly seen from its translucent petals, but the colors faded together to create a magnificent sight. The 10-meter-large lotus made a rather large contrast to the tiny nascent soul, but as it uttered a chain of profound incantations, the lotus flickered with light and began to grow smaller. Each time it shrunk, it released dazzling rays of light. After a short while, the lotus became a foot tall, and its petals now appeared solid and material. The 6 flames danced across them in an otherworldly display. The 5 cultivators couldn't help but betray their surprise, but they released their flames with increasing intensity regardless. When these flames poured into the lotus, they seemed to disappear. Then the nascent soul suddenly opened its eyes, revealing an odd golden shine. It then reached one of its hands towards the lotus. Crackles repeatedly sounded as countless blue threads ejected from its fingertips, fusing with the nearest lotus petal. While nascent soul's incantations continued, it folded its fingers towards its palm. Blue light then sparkled with ever-increasing intensity as the threads began to tremble violently. Drones hummed from the lotus with the petals soon closing around another. Shortly after, time seemed to reverse as the lotus shrunk back to a bud, the nascent soul buried within it. The 6 flames continuously spun on its surface, filling the air with its brilliance. When the cultivators saw this, they cast a spell seal and released their control over the glacial flames for the time being. The 6-colored bud faintly trembled and dropped downward. Rays of light shot out from it for a time, as the bud disappeared into the sphere of white light. The bud shined once more before slipping into the unconscious body of Master Arctic Dragon. At that moment, the other 5 resumed releasing their glacial flames into the light sphere. The flames then condensed into rays of light after entering the sphere and shot into Arctic Dragon's body. The extreme cold of the flames stimulated his body, coordinating to break his bottleneck. Suddenly, the cracks of tearing space sounded from within the formation. Outside of the profound Jade Cave, on a remote street in the palace's Ice City, there were 2 white-robed palace disciples walking side by side. They wore cold faces, and their eyes vigilantly looked around them. The huge ice phoenix that was circling the sky earlier had disappeared, along with the 2 elders that were fighting it. Although the 2 were currently in a remote corner of the palace Ice City, the sides of the street were filled with lines of buildings. The 2 disciples already knew that all the low-grade disciples in the area already evacuated and should be empty, but even as such, the 2 didn't dare to be careless and kept on guard. "Finally, we've arrived." One of the disciples blinked and looked ahead of them. They then turned a corner and entered one of the buildings from behind. Their surroundings lit up before them, following the appearance of a 100-meter-wide spacious area with a man and a woman waiting there for them. When the middle-aged woman saw the 2 appear, she looked at them with a trace of resentment and said, "You're late. If you took any longer, we would have started without you." The man standing next to her was a large man with pitch-black skin. They wore the robes of North Night Palace, but their uniform appeared to belong to the lowest-grade disciples, far lower in rank than the 2 that had just arrived. But strangely enough, the woman's tone didn't appear polite in the slightest. One of the disciples that just arrived let out a cold snort. "Our allies on the outside already attacked the outermost layers of the Grand Formation and are at least 50 kilometers away from the city. The cultivators have frequent patrols as well, so it took quite some effort for us to find an excuse to come over here. Else if we were to raise their suspicions, our efforts would completely went to waste." The woman raised her brow and was about to say something when the dark-skinned man at her side lost his patience, shouting, "Enough empty words. Let's take action. Even if I am only an incarnation, I won't be so easily defeated." She decided to remain silent when she heard this, and the 2 who arrived also kept silent as if in fear. They each took out a pile of formation plates of spirit stones from their storage pouch and began to place down a spell formation. They moved with practiced movements, and in only a moment, they formed the outline of a small spell formation. But if an experienced spell formation master were to examine it, they would astonishedly discover that it was an interim teleportation formation, one that could only receive. In the time it took to take a meal, when the spell formation was nearly complete, a series of loud explosions boomed. The astonishment of the four, they all released their protective magic tools in surprise. A few trifling demon beasts dare to stir up trouble before the sect. Old fogies like us could hardly allow this to continue. An old voice emerged from the icy mist in the air, followed by the appearance of two men. One of the men was old, had bold eyebrows and long facial hair. The other was a middle-aged man with red-brown skin and wore a longsword on his back. "It's the enforcement elders of North Night Palace. Let's run." When the woman saw the two, she shouted in alarm and shot away in a green streak. The other three conspirators reacted no less quickly and fled hurriedly. "If those demons managed to escape, we'd be a laughingstock." The middle-aged man sneered and flicked his hand, releasing 4 blinding sword streaks. 3 screams immediately followed as the sword chi swept through the woman and 2 of the men. Only the large, dark-skinned man continued to flee, having only stumbled from the strike. "Yeah, interesting." The middle-aged man found this odd and opened his mouth, releasing a streak of blinding white light to pursue the large man. In the blink of an eye, the light circled around him and cleaved him in two. At that moment, the bold-browed old man shook his sleeve and released 4 magic tools shaped as willow leaves. They soon vanished from sight. In the following moment, 4 leaves struck the corpses and sprouted green flowers instantly from them, releasing an odd shriek before turning the corpses into clouds of smoke. When the red-faced middle-aged man saw this, he turned his gaze to the nearly completed teleportation formation with a sullen expression. With a wave of his hand, he struck it with a dense sword streak. Following a loud explosion, the teleportation formation was replaced with a large crater. "Let's go." Although we might not be able to truly harm the demons by slaying their incarnations, it should still leave an impression on them. The old man twirled his beard before shortly flying off in a streak of white light. The red-faced middle-aged man chuckled and left the area with a relaxed attitude. In other remote regions of the Ice City, similar events occurred. The disciples puppeted by soul threads of high-grade demon beasts were massacred by elders of North Night Palace. Deep underground in one of the halls of North Night Palace's hidden Arctic dragon border, there were 6 nascent soul cultivators solemnly talking with one another, the palace master included amongst them. 3 of them, including the palace master, appeared extremely pale as if their vitality was damaged. The beautiful woman, Palace Master Liu, tensely frowned and said, "It is beyond expectation for Myriad Demon Valley to bring along their Myriad Demon banner. I originally believed it to be an ordinary spirit treasure replica, but to think it was this powerful. If it weren't for Elders Fang and Huang, I fear I wouldn't have been able to block the strike from old Demon Chi's incarnation. Won't it be too early if we were to go now? We can just retreat when those demons get to the city," a heavily bearded and disagreed. A white-faced elderly man who had already sustained injuries retorted, "If we wait until then, it'll be too late." He was clearly in agreement with the beautiful woman's opinion. "HMPH, have you become a coward just from a single battle against these demons, Senior Marshal Brother Wang?" the bearded man jeered. In the face of the man's jeers, the old man remained calm as he said indifferently, "You don't know anything, Junior Marshal Brother Tong. You haven't seen the might of the Myriad Demon flag with your own eyes. Even though it's only a spirit treasure replica, its power won't be inferior to the primordial heaven-wielding seal by much." Thankfully, old Devil Chi arrived on the scene in person. Otherwise, even if I were to join forces with the Palace Master, it would still have been extremely difficult for us to match the enemy in power. The bearded man's expression wavered slightly, but he still shook his head as he argued, "Is it really that powerful? Even so, it definitely won't be a simple matter for our enemies to break through the final few layers of restrictions we've set up. I feel like it would be a waste to retreat before we take advantage of that fact." The beautiful woman's brows furrowed upon hearing this. She cast her gaze toward the faces of the people around her and said in a slow voice, "Don't forget that there are enemies who have already reached the city. If it weren't for Junior Marshal Sister Bai and Junior Marshal Sister Yi luring the Ice Phoenix into the illusionary light formation to trap it, we most likely wouldn't even be here discussing this matter right now. That Ice Phoenix is a pureblood descendant of a heavenly spirit beast. It may only be a grade 10 demon beast, but it possesses power almost comparable to that of a half-deity transformation cultivator. It's definitely not something that late nascent soul human cultivators like us can compare with. Even with two elders controlling the formation spell in person, they won't be able to contain the beast for long. Under such circumstances, we should prepare for a retreat as early as possible. However, Elder Tong's suggestion is not entirely unfounded. How about this? We'll get the weaker disciples to hide in the Spirit Void Hall first. The more powerful disciples, and I will use the final few layers of restrictions to deal the enemy a heavy blow. We'll kill as many demon beasts as possible, but do not engage in prolonged battles and retreat back to the Spirit Void Hall the first sign of the restrictions being broken. Please remember that our main priority is to conserve our forces, not to eradicate demon beasts. Everyone felt like this was a feasible course of action, so they all nodded in agreement with her suggestion. Thus, they began to implement her plan as everyone left the palace to rally the disciples, preparing for retreat as well as the final battle. As for the beautiful woman herself, she remained in the hall and sat down in a chair, falling into deep thought with a hint of concern in her eyes. You've already made appropriate arrangements, so what are you worried about? Could it be that you can also sense that something's wrong? The beautiful woman was sitting in her seat, minding her own business, but a faint voice suddenly sounded in her spiritual sense. It was an unfamiliar female voice. The woman's expression remained unchanged, but she replied coldly in her spiritual sense, "Infernal Ghost Mother, you better not do anything out of line unless you want to experience the pain of having your soul pierced." She seemed to be aware of who this woman was. If you feel like you can't handle the myriad demon flag, you can get me to help you out. If you remove the restrictions on my body, you and I can join forces, and a mere myriad demon flag will be nothing to us. The woman cackled. She appeared to be very confident in her own abilities. Remove your restrictions. Keep dreaming, the woman chuckled coldly. I'm just looking out for you. No need to get angry. This time, the demon beasts clearly have another intention in mind. Otherwise, why would they have mobilized so many of their troops? You might not be safe even if you hide in the Spirit Void Hall. In my opinion, it'll be very difficult for the North Night Palace to survive this ordeal, the woman cackled in response. I won't remove your restrictions no matter what you say. Releasing a ghost cultivator as powerful as you into this world will result in catastrophic consequences. You can just stay in the profound ghost badge. The beautiful woman wasn't tempted at all. The woman fell silent for a moment before screeching in an enraged voice. You say that now, but think about it. Without my help, how would you have been able to progress to the late nascent soul stage in just over 500 years? I've also saved your life on many occasions. If I hadn't, you would have died countless times. How could you have become the palace master of the North Night Palace without me? You are indeed correct, but don't forget that if I hadn't extracted the profound ghost badge out of that block of myriad-year profound ice, you'd still be hibernating underground. You only helped me reach the nascent soul stage, so I would have the power to lift the simultaneous birth curse placed upon you. Is that not the case? Don't make it sound like you're some kind of philanthropist. You only helped me to help yourself, the beautiful woman replied indifferently. But you promised me that you'd release me. The woman was still furious. I did, but then I found a secret technique that allowed me to draw on your profound yin ghost chi to drastically improve my rate of cultivation. If you can help me reach the deity transformation stage, your simultaneous birth curse would automatically be lifted, and you'll be able to leave then. Help you reach the deity transformation stage. Do you actually think I'm an omnipotent god? If I could progress to the deity transformation stage, would I have been forced to become a ghost cultivator? The woman was thunderous with rage. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D493, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D500, letter 1D486, letter 1D484, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4F6. If you can't help me reach the deity transformation stage, then I'll make sure to seal you again before I pass away, the woman said expressionlessly. In an extremely frosty voice, the woman said, HMPH, we'll see if you can even make it through this ordeal first. You've almost exhausted your supply of spirit stones as well, right? Without those things, there's no way you'll be able to make me help you. I may not have any more spirit stones, but what you said earlier was nothing more than conjecture. What are those demons going to be able to do to the Spirit Void Hall? Your efforts won't be required here. The North Night Palace can deal with this threat on our own. The beautiful woman responded with a dark expression. She made a hand seal, seemingly to activate some sort of celestial technique, and the voice of the so-called infernal ghost mother was abruptly cut off. The beautiful recomposed herself before making her way out of the hall. 2 days later, after all of the low-level disciples were evacuated, the the demon beasts outside quickly reached City of Ice. The North Night Palace was planning on taking advantage of the final few layers of restrictions to engage in one final battle with the demon beasts. The manifestation of Old Devil Chi, that small child, had fully recovered from his injuries during the past few days. He and the old man were charging into battle with the other metamorphosized demon beasts. Following an extremely intense battle, both sides suffered some casualties, but the demons were ultimately the ones that came out on top. The small child was able to use the power of the myriad demon flag to engulf two North Night Palace elders in quick succession. As a result, the beautiful woman was forced to retreat while the final restriction kept the demon beasts at bay. Upon seeing this, Old Devil Chi immediately unleashed the full power of the myriad demon flag. Countless demon beasts transformed into demonic chi, creating a turbulent wave that was crashing relentlessly against the final restriction. All of the North Night Palace cultivators had retreated into the hidden Arctic Dragon border, entering the Spirit Void Hall for protection. The restriction on the border was immediately activated at the beautiful woman's behest. The three halls that were positioned in a triangular formation began to tremor violently as the ground began to split open, revealing a super formation spell that encompassed the three halls at its center. There were countless spirit stones embedded into the formation spell, and most of them appeared to be of the mid-grade or above. At the very core of the formation, there were even a dozen or so high-grade spirit stones that were exceedingly rare. Runes tumbled within the formation, shimmering with a mysterious and profound light. Moments later, spiritual light began to intertwine in the air above, creating a vast expanse of silver light that almost encompassed the entire border. Right at this moment, faint spiritual light also began to emanate from the three halls, following which three thick pillars of light erupted from the top of the halls. Those pillars of light shot straight into the air before disappearing into the silver light above. The sound of rumbling thunderclaps erupted as peculiar spatial fluctuations radiated from within the light. Immediately thereafter, the light began to tumble and churn urgently, following which a white arc of light several thousand feet in length began to slowly emerge. As soon as the arc of light appeared, a gust of wind swept up within the border. Small stones and debris were flung into the air as a result, and countless buildings were instantly toppled. The world's origin chi was cast into disarray, and everything was plunged into chaos. However, those three halls seemed to be somehow related to those spatial rifts. The light emanating from them brightened considerably as the white arc of light in the air above slowly elongated and widened, as if a demonic eye was slowly opening. When the rift had almost encompassed half of the area in the air above the border, bursts of silver light suddenly erupted from within, enveloping the three spirit void halls. One of the halls tremored violently before slowly rising up from the ground, traveling toward the spatial rift. A silver light flashed and the hall disappeared without a trace. The second hall immediately followed suit. However, just as the third hall was about to rise up from the ground, a white light flashed from somewhere within the hidden Arctic Dragon border, upon which a snowy white ice phoenix roughly 10 feet in size suddenly revealed itself. A hint of surprise flashed through the spirit beast's green eyes as it caught sight of what was happening within the border. It then turned its attention to the final hall that was rising into the air and opened its mouth, blasting forth a white streak of light, which abruptly disappeared. The phoenix then looked on with a cold expression, as that final hall was also sucked into the spatial rift, without doing anything to prevent that from happening. After all three halls had been absorbed into the spatial rift, the latter began to slowly seal over. A flash of silver light erupted and the rift completely disappeared. All of the phenomena that had taken place within the border also vanished. Only then did the ice phoenix let loose a clear cry before spreading its wings and disappearing amid a burst of white light. Some time later, an earth-shattering boom erupted and the entire mountain tremored and quaked. The demons had finally broken through the final restriction and stormed into the City of Ice. The old man and the small child then rushed directly toward the mountain. However, right at this moment, Master Arctic Dragon, who was situated in the profound ice cave, was at a critical final juncture of breaking through his bottleneck. Within the formation spell, Han Li's purple apex flames had already been snuffed out, and he was looking toward a certain direction with a surprised look on his face. Not only him, but the old woman, Bai Mingson, and the others also wore similar expressions as they stared at the massive rock at the center of the formation spell. This was because the ball of light atop that rock had completely disappeared, and had been replaced by a white lotus flower of light. Master Arctic Dragon was sitting within that lotus flower, and wisps of glacial chi were emanating from its petals, making his figure appear indistinct and murky within the lotus. There was a six-colored lotus flower insignia imprinted on Master Arctic Dragon's glabella, which was rather indistinct, and blinking in and out of existence in an extremely unstable manner. What was even more peculiar was that a faint fragrant scent was wafting forth from his body. It was like the scent of sandalwood or of medicine, and it was a very rich aroma, but there was a faint fishy odor intermingled within. It was incredible. Even though it was an extremely rare occurrence to witness someone making a breakthrough to the deity transformation stage in person, there were still many rumors regarding this phenomenon circulating in the cultivation world. Transformation of the physical body into sandalwood. Who would have thought that this legend would be real? Following the conclusion of this process, he will have successfully broken through his bottleneck, right? The old woman murmured to herself with an envious look on her face. Not necessarily. Brother Arctic Dragon's situation seems to be a little shaky at the moment. It appears that he has only achieved the prerequisites for making a breakthrough to the deity transformation stage, but the metamorphosis of the nascent soul within his body doesn't appear to be progressing very smoothly. Otherwise, the insignia materialized from our glacial flames wouldn't be blinking so sporadically. The old monk looked on with furrowed brows and was immediately able to identify the issue. That can't be helped. Even though we lent him the power of our glacial flames to temporarily enhance his nascent soul, that is not his own power, so it's naturally going to be rather difficult for him to control, Han Li remarked. A hint of concern appeared on the green-robed middle-aged man's face as he asked, "How about we help the Grand Elder stabilize his nascent soul?" That definitely won't do. Breaking through a deity transformation bottleneck is not that simple. Perhaps this instability is what Senior Marshal Brother Arctic Dragon is seeking. Perhaps he wants to use this power to break through the bottleneck in one fell swoop. If we recklessly intervene, we could hurt him instead. It's best to just stand by and observe for now, Bai Mengson rejected. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing that, and he didn't offer any objections. Everyone else glanced at one another before also falling silent. In reality, even if they wanted to help, they most likely wouldn't be able to anyway. After manipulating their glacial flames for 2 days and 2 nights without pause, everyone was already utterly exhausted, having overexerted their magic power and spiritual sense in the process. As such, they could only look on as Master Arctic Dragon strove to overcome the most arduous hurdle by himself. What everyone failed to notice was that there was a blue light that was shimmering incessantly within Han Li's eyes. He was carefully assessing the flow of magic power in Master Arctic Dragon's body, as well as the changes taking place in his nascent soul, and committing all of those details to memory. These observations would surely be of great benefit to him in the future. Just this experience alone made Han Li feel that it was worth taking the risk to stay here. After all, it was an extremely rare opportunity to be able to witness a cultivator making a breakthrough to the deity transformation stage. This was an opportunity that he had to grab with both hands. Everyone else could also use their spiritual sense to derive some observations, but they were clearly unable to observe anywhere near as much as Han Li could using his bright-sight spirit eyes, so he was benefiting far more from this than they were. Time passed by slowly. After what seemed like an eternity, Master Arctic Dragon's body suddenly shuddered as he sat within the white lotus flower. The peculiar aroma wafting from his body instantly became several times richer as the lotus insignia on his glabella abruptly expanded, creating a series of lotus projections that began to blossom. Everyone was instantly alerted by those changes taking place and immediately focused their attention toward Master Arctic Dragon. The latter's eyes had already opened, and a crimson and golden light was radiating from his eyeballs. At the same time, he remained completely stationary, but his body was slowly rising into the air as if he were completely weightless. Master Arctic Dragon looked around, and a hint of elation appeared on his face. After a brief hesitation, he still raised a hand, and his fingers tremored slightly as if he were making some sort of hand seal. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li felt the remaining spiritual power in his body pulse before surging violently, escaping his body in a violent torrent. Han Li was extremely shocked and immediately activated his cultivation arts several times. Only then was he able to temporarily repress the unrest within his spiritual power. Everyone else's expressions also changed drastically as they, too, took a series of flustered measures to stabilize their spiritual power. It appeared that he was not the only one who had been afflicted by that peculiar phenomenon. Han Li's eyes flashed, and before he had figured out what had just happened, a ringing sound suddenly erupted from the several formation spells nearby. The light barrier nearby shuddered violently as wisps of light began to shoot forth from it, drifting directly toward the formation spell. Those wisps of spiritual light disappeared as soon as they made contact with Master Arctic Dragon's body. A short while later, the light barrier began to crumble, and the light flowing in from outside, the formation spell turned into a cream color while becoming more and more viscous. The world's origin chi has been triggered. Someone murmured in a low voice that was filled with elation, awe, admiration, and a hint of envy. Han Li's heart jolted upon hearing that. Master Arctic Dragon S was like a bottomless pit. No matter how much glacial energy surged into his body, it affected no change aside from making golden light emanating from his eyes and glabella glow even brighter. This phenomenon lasted for about 10 minutes, following which a series of explosive sounds erupted from within Master Arctic Dragon's body. His seated figure immediately grew taller by several inches. At the same time, the lotus insignia on his glabella expanded drastically, obscuring most of his head behind it. The lotus then abruptly contracted, finally shrinking to around the size of a thumb as it imprinted itself onto his glabella. The light surging toward him from all directions faltered before dissipating. The unrest in the spiritual power within the bodies of Han Li and the others also settled. Master Arctic Dragon made a hand seal with a solemn expression before slowly closing his eyes. The spiritual light emanating from the six-colored lotus flower on his glabella also receded. Has he already progressed to the deity transformation stage? The same thought flashed through everyone's mind upon seeing this. The green-robed middle-aged man and Bai Mengson were overjoyed. However, before anyone had a chance to ask, a muffled groan suddenly escaped Master Arctic Dragon's mouth. His face then suddenly began to twist and warp without any premonition, and he grabbed onto his own head as if he were suffering from excruciating pain. Letter 1D68F, letter 1D563, letter 1D41E, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D430, letter 1D556, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D5FA. Han Li and the others were all flabbergasted upon seeing this. "What's going on, Senior Marshal Brother?" the green-robed man yelled urgently, but didn't dare to approach Master Arctic Dragon. The latter looked up at the green-robed man with difficulty, but before he had a chance to say anything, light suddenly began to flash violently from the lotus flower on his glabella before it detached itself. The lotus then began to swell and shrink erratically before exploding with a light thump, transforming into 6 balls of spiritual light as it did so. Master Arctic Dragon let loose a wail of anguish and his body swayed unsteadily before plummeting from the air. He landed right inside the white lotus flower down below, where he lay curled up into a ball, trembling uncontrollably. Grand Elder, Bai Mengson couldn't just stand by and watch any longer. She and the green-robed middle-aged man immediately shot forth as streaks of light toward the lotus flower. Han Li and the other two looked at one another, but remained where they were. "I'm all right. It was just some backlash from the world's origin chi." Much to everyone's surprise, Master Arctic Dragon suddenly flipped over and got up into a seated position again. His face was still quite pale, but his features were no longer twisted in agony. Bai Mengson and the green-robed man were very relieved to see this, and they stopped in the air above the lotus flower. Just as they were about to inquire Master Arctic Dragon for more details, the latter hurriedly said something before flipping his hand over to reveal a stack of silver daggers that had been used earlier. He waved his hand and streaks of silver light shot forth as all 16 daggers were flung into the air. However, the silver daggers then immediately circled back, so their sharp tips were facing Master Arctic Dragon, who let loose a low cry, upon which all 16 daggers pierced into his body at the same time. Aside from on his head, there were dagger hilts protruding all over his body, while the blades had virtually completely embedded themselves into his flesh. Han Li's eyes immediately narrowed upon seeing this, as he stared unblinkingly at Master Arctic Dragons. At this moment, a layer of mixed flames suddenly surfaced over Master Arctic Dragon's body. The flames were predominantly blue and white in color, but there were also other colors like yellow and green intermingled within. "Fellow Taoists, please take back your glacial flames," Master Arctic Dragon urged in a solemn voice while his eyes remained closed. The monk uttered a Buddhist prayer before waving his hand in Master Arctic Dragon's direction. As a result, The green glacial flames that had appeared over Master Arctic Dragon's body transformed into wisps of spiritual light, which then converged to form a small ball before flying toward the monk. The monk waved a sleeve through the air to accept his own glacial flame. Han Li and the others also followed suit, guiding their own glacial flames back to themselves. Moments later, there was only a layer of celestial ice flames remaining over Master Arctic Dragon's body, while the peculiar scent he had been emitting had disappeared. However, his expression remained rather tense as he made a strange hand seal. At the same time, he began to utter a peculiar chant, upon which the silver daggers all over his body began to tremor gently. Following a low ringing sound, the white glacial chi began to surface over the hilts of the daggers, instantly making them appear more translucent. Master Arctic Dragon ceased his chanting and made another completely different hand seal. A series of dull thumps then erupted as bursts of piercing silver light erupted from the daggers, shattering the layer of ice on the surface of his body, which then disappeared into nothingness. However, more glacial chi then surfaced along those silver blades, transforming into a layer of ice, only to be shattered again through the same process. After watching this cycle being repeated a few times, Han Li's lips twitched as a sense of enlightenment welled up in his heart. Master Arctic Dragon was using the power of those treasures to forcibly expel the profound jade's glacial chi he had absorbed into his body earlier. It appeared that he had been unable to break through the deity transformation bottleneck after all. Otherwise, this glacial chi would act as the perfect medicine for him to recover his lost energy. A series of thoughts flashed through Han Li's mind, and he instantly came to a decision. A long sigh escaped from Master Arctic Dragon's mouth as he opened his eyes. His eyes had returned to their normal black and white color scheme, but he retained the appearance of a man in his 30s. He looked up into the sky, and a dejected expression appeared on his face. The green-robed man hesitated momentarily before asking, "Are you all right, Senior Marshal Brother?" "I'm fine. It's just a pity that all of my efforts have gone to waste." A wry smile appeared on Master Arctic Dragon's face as he rose to his feet. The lotus of light beneath him instantly crumbled, disintegrating into specks of spiritual light which soon disappeared. He then descended gently onto the massive rock down below. "That really is a pity. Your spiritual sense was only slightly lacking, fellow Taoist Arctic Dragon. Otherwise, you would have succeeded in making your breakthrough. In any case, the secret technique that you have invented is indeed a feasible method progressing to the deity transformation stage." The old woman heaved a forlorn sigh before offering words of encouragement. "Indeed, Madame Long, it will be exceedingly difficult for someone to possess a glacial flame themselves, then to find a glacial location like the profound Jade Cave, but I'm sure many people will try to replicate your method, fellow Taoist Arctic Dragon." The monk chimed in with a smile. Master Arctic Dragon grimaced upon hearing the monk's words, but he merely shook his head with a resigned expression. He then looked down at his own hands, and a hint of emotion flashed through his eyes at the sight of his firm and supple skin. "Fellow Taoist Arctic Dragon, seeing as there is nothing else to be done here, isn't it time for you to withdraw this formation spell and allow us to return to the stone hall to recover our energy?" Han Li asked with furrowed brows. At the same time, he glanced around at the light barrier that had just appeared around them again. "No hurry. I still have some things I need to take care of, and I'll withdraw the formation spell once I've done everything I need to do," Master Arctic Dragon replied indifferently without even looking up at Han Li. The green-robed man and Bai Mingson took a glance at one another, before hovering expressionlessly above Master Arctic Dragon. "What do you mean by that?" The monk had figured out that something was amiss, and his expression immediately darkened. The old woman didn't say anything, but a wary look had also appeared on her face. Her hand rustled in her sleeve as if she were grabbing onto something, and she turned to appraise the trio from the North Night Palace with a cold expression. "No need to be alarmed, fellow Taoists. I bear no ill will toward any of you. I would simply like Brother Han to return something that belongs to me." Master Arctic Dragon finally raised his head to look at Han Li, while the silver daggers around him began to emit a ringing sound. At the same time, there was already golden light shimmering within his eyes, seemingly as if he had already recovered all of his magic power. "Return something that belongs to you." Both the monk and old woman turned to Han Li with a hint of surprise on their faces. "Sure you jest, fellow Taoist. This is my first time here at the North Night Palace, and I've never taken anything from here." A peculiar look appeared on Master Arctic Dragon's face upon hearing Han Li's words, and he fell silent for a moment. All of a sudden, he flipped his hand over, and a ball of blue light appeared over his palm. Within that blue light was a miniature cauldron. "That's the celestial blue cauldron," the monk exclaimed. He then rummaged around in his sleeve with a stunned expression before producing an identical miniature cauldron. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D69B, letter 1D68T, letter 1D68E, letter 1D604, letter 1D556. Letter 1D5F0, letter 1D560, letter 1D46. His gaze traveled back and forth between the two cauldrons, unable to comprehend the situation. Master Arctic Dragon turned to Han Li with narrowed eyes and said, "No need to be alarmed, fellow Taoist Moju. Your cauldron is not counterfeit. It is also a genuine celestial blue cauldron. It's just that there is not just one celestial blue cauldron, but a pair instead. Furthermore, both of these ancient treasures are merely replicas of something else. What I'm asking for from fellow Taoist Han is none other than the divine spirit treasure, the Heaven Void Cauldron. You do have it, am I correct?" "A divine spirit treasure. You have a treasure of that caliber, fellow Taoist Han," the old woman exclaimed. She also turned to Han Li with a hint of disbelief and greed in her eyes. The monk was naturally stunned by this revelation as well, and he, too, turned his attention to Han Li. Prior to coming here, the two of them had inquired Master Arctic Dragon about Han Li. Master Arctic Dragon had informed them that he was a cultivator from the Heavenly South region. It was absolutely astonishing to them that a cultivator who hailed from such a small place would be in possession of a divine spirit treasure. Han Li didn't immediately deny his possession of the Heaven Void Cauldron. Instead, a half-smile appeared on his face as he asked, "Oh, so you're referring to the Heaven Void Cauldron. I don't mind you asking about it, but I'd like you to answer a query of mine. How are you so sure that I have the cauldron? And in what way is your spirit void hall related to this cauldron?" "Sounds like you really do have the cauldron. As for how I knew that you possessed the cauldron, that's not something I need to keep a secret. Your purple apex flames have been infused with the celestial ice flames imbued within the Heaven Void Cauldron. Aside from the celestial blue cauldron replicas, the Heaven Void Cauldron is the only treasure in the human world that contains such a glacial flame. Coincidentally, I refined my own celestial ice flames to the maximal extent recently, so I'm naturally very sensitive towards celestial ice flames of a lower grade," Master Arctic Dragon explained. Even though he was almost completely sure of the fact that Han Li possessed the Heaven Void Cauldron, he was still ecstatic to hear the notion being confirmed by Han Li himself. "So that means you knew I had the Heaven Void Cauldron from the first time you met me?" Han Li asked with furrowed brows. Master Arctic Dragon appraised Han Li with a solemn look and said, "Indeed, I didn't think that you would admit it so willingly. I had thought that you would deny possession of the cauldron, and I had prepared many more follow-up questions to interrogate you with, but it appears that wasn't necessary. The Heaven Void Cauldron was a spirit treasure carried by the fairy Ice Soul, the matriarch of our North Night Palace. Our matriarch had set off to travel the world with this treasure over 100 years ago, but it was nowhere to be found following her return. That's why the Spirit Void Hall was constructed. I have no interest in learning about how you obtained such a treasure, but it does indeed belong to our North Night Palace. As long as you're willing to hand it over, I'll be more than happy to let you go." An enlightened expression appeared on Han Li's face, and he chuckled to himself as he looked at Master Arctic Dragon, but didn't say anything. It was quite clear that Han Li hadn't taken his implicit threats seriously at all, and Master Arctic Dragon's expression darkened upon seeing that. "I heard from Menjiao that you are an extremely powerful man. Even though your cultivation base is only at the mid-nascent soul stage, your combat prowess is comparable to that of a late-nascent soul cultivator, and even a demon beast like the Silverwing Demon is unable to harm you. If we were located anywhere else, perhaps I wouldn't be able to do anything to you, but we're currently standing in my formation spell within the profound Jade Cave. Furthermore, you only have 30% of your magic power remaining at most, while the effect of my secret technique is still in effect. Both my body and my magic power are at their peak. Need I break down your chances of securing victory under such damning circumstances?" The golden light in Master Arctic Dragon's eyes shimmered even more brightly as he spoke. The green-robed man and Bai Mingson were also looking intently at Han Li, anticipating an imminent battle. "Who would have thought that you would turn on me after I offered my assistance to help you break through your bottleneck? Is this how the North Night Palace repays others for their kindness?" A cold smile appeared on Han Li's face. "Have I not repaid you enough? Not only did I give you a copy of the mantra for refining glacial flames, I also gave you a copy of the secret technique that I had devised after countless centuries of pondering. Furthermore, the main reason you decided to help me is so that you can witness the secret technique in action, is it not? Master Arctic Dragon harumphed coldly. Hanli glanced at the monk and old woman beside him and said in a cold voice, "Really now, that makes some sense when you put it that way. However, I'm not the only person trapped here in this formation spell. A divine spirit treasure is an extremely important matter. Are you planning on killing these two to silence them?" The two of them both stirred upon hearing Han Li's words. In particular, the monk looked down at the miniature cauldron in his hand with a dark expression. I'm afraid your mind games will prove to be in vain here. I have known those two for many years. They wouldn't turn on me no matter what you say. Master Arctic Dragon chuckled coldly in response. This is a matter to be taken care of between fellow Taoist Han and fellow Taoist Arctic Dragon. I wish to take no part in this. The old woman glanced at Han Li coldly before her body flashed through the air, upon which she reappeared at the border of the light barrier. Han Li's eyelids twitched slightly upon seeing this. We are all here to help Brother Arctic Dragon break through his bottleneck, so let's not turn on one another now. How about this? If the Heaven Void Cauldron really does belong to the North Night Palace, I propose that the palace offers fellow Taoist Han some compensation in exchange for the cauldron. I think all of us want to see this being settled diplomatically. The monk was trying to act as a mediator. Master Arctic Dragon's expression eased slightly upon hearing that, and he offered, "The palace is currently in a rather tumultuous situation, so I would like to avoid making Brother Han my enemy as well. As long as you're willing to hand over the cauldron, I can give you a large sum of magic stones as remuneration. The compensation I'm willing to offer will ensure that you're never left wanting for magic stones for the rest of your life." However, Han Li suddenly burst into laughter upon hearing that, and looked up into the sky without saying anything. Master Arctic Dragon's expression darkened again upon seeing this. His shoulders trembled slightly with rage, and the blue flames all of his body sprang up violently, transforming him into a massive blue fireball. The green-robed man and Bai Mengxin also began to make hand seals. A dozen or so glittering and translucent flying swords shot forth from one's body, while the other produced two short black halberds from their sleeves. The weapons circled in the air around the two of them, emitting a peculiar screeching sound. A resigned expression appeared on the monk's face upon seeing this, and he uttered a Buddhist prayer before flying over to the border of the light barrier to join the old woman. He was clearly not going to intervene in this matter either. However, on the way to the border of the light barrier, the monk suddenly changed directions and flew toward Han Li. Han Li's expression faltered upon seeing this, and before he had a chance to decipher the monk's intentions, the monk suddenly transmitted his voice to him. "Brother Han, take this celestial blue cauldron. I'll assist you in the upcoming battle." The monk suddenly raised his hand as he spoke, and a ball of blue light came hurtling toward Han Li. It was none other than that celestial blue cauldron. "Mojiu, what are you doing?" Master Arctic Dragon roared with rage. Han Li didn't know why the monk would decide to help him, but he certainly wasn't going to refuse a treasure being offered up to him. Thus, he waved his sleeve through the air, and a green light swept forth as he attempted to stow the cauldron away into his sleeve. Master Arctic Dragon's face darkened upon seeing this, and he immediately made a hand seal before abruptly pointing a finger at the miniature cauldron. A spluttering sound erupted as the cauldron faltered in midair, immediately following which its lid flew off as turbulent blue flames erupted from within. Those flames then enveloped the cauldron and forced it to change direction, guiding it toward Master Arctic Dragon. "So you really did mess with this cauldron already," the monk exclaimed in a cold voice. He was already prepared for this situation, and he reached out with a hand, feigning a grabbing motion. A green hand of light immediately appeared above the cauldron before descending in an attempt to grasp at the cauldron. Golden light erupted from Master Arctic Dragon's eyes as he roared, "Break!" A loud rumbling sound then erupted as the back of the huge green hand warped and twisted. An ancient rune that was flashing with golden light appeared from thin air before exploding with a resounding boom. Scintillating golden light erupted with devastating power, reducing the hand to nothingness. "The righteous song mantra, you cultivating in Buddhist arts," the monk exclaimed. Master Arctic Dragon completely ignored him as he continued to draw the cauldron toward himself. Right at this moment, a series of green threads shot forth from nearby. Green light flashed as the threads wound themselves around the cauldron, dragging it toward Han Li before anyone had a chance to react. Master Arctic Dragon stirred upon seeing this, and he immediately made a hand seal as he uttered the word break once again. Several golden runes exploded upon the green threads in quick succession amid a string of deafening booms. However, the green threads were only scattered slightly before reverting back to their original formation and continued dragging the cauldron away. Meanwhile, Han Li produced a small cauldron that was only several inches in size. Runes were hovering around the cauldron, and it bore a strong resemblance toward the celestial blue cauldron. Those green threads were shooting forth from none other than that cauldron. The Heaven Void Cauldron, Master Arctic Dragon murmured upon seeing that. As the celestial blue cauldron was dragged toward him, he tapped the Heaven Void Cauldron to produce a light ringing sound, following which the green threads originating from the cauldron completely encapsulated the celestial blue cauldron in a shimmering ball of azure threads. He then stowed the azure ball into his sleeve before turning to Master Arctic Dragon with a cold sneer on his face. Master Arctic Dragon was not enraged by the fact that the celestial blue cauldron had been wrested away. Instead, he heaved a faint sigh and turned to the monk with a forlorn expression as he said, "It's very impressive that you're already able to use the Heaven Void Cauldron, but at your cultivation base, the most that you're capable of is mastering the first layer of the artifact imprint technique. In that case, you'll only be able to unleash a small fraction of the spirit treasure's power. What I'm more surprised by is you, Mo Jiu. I didn't think that you would make such an unwise decision. You're forcing me to take you down as well." The monk pulled out a shimmering green wooden knocker from his sleeve with a calm expression as he said, "We've been acquaintances for over a century, so I don't want to become your enemy either, but I must do this for self-preservation. I wouldn't want to see you kill fellow Taoist Han before silencing me as well. The divine spirit treasure is no laughing matter. I gather that you never planned to let me go from the start, right? I'm merely an itinerant cultivator, so I can't compare to the likes of Madame Long." "What do you mean by that, Mo Jiu?" the old woman asked coldly upon hearing that. "Don't try to play me for a fool, Madame Long. Other people may not be aware of this, but I know for a fact that your Green Willow sect is actually just a branch of the North Night Palace's outer sect. You're also one of the elders of the North Night Palace's outer sect. Isn't that right, Madame Long?" the monk interrogated with a grace expression. Master Arctic Dragon hesitated momentarily before finally deciding to admit to the truth. "I didn't think you would be aware of this. Elder Long, there's no need to keep up pretenses any longer. Let's bring them down together." I was thinking that I would be able to sit this one out, but looks like I won't be able to after all. However, you didn't tell me about the Heaven Void Cauldron in advance, Grand Elder. Are you keeping secrets even from an outer sect elder like me now?" A dark expression appeared on the old woman's face as a staff that was roughly 10 feet long appeared in her hand amid a burst of yellow light. "I was only keeping this a secret as a precautionary measure. In any case, let's take care of these two and recover the cauldron first. The cauldron is an extremely powerful treasure that will ensure our palace is powerful enough to combat any enemies who dare to challenge us," Master Arctic Dragon urged. "Leave Mo Jiu to me. You three take care of that Han brat and take the Heaven Void Cauldron from him." The old woman was still rather displeased, but she still decided to comply. "All right, let's do that." Master Arctic Dragon didn't hesitate any longer. He flipped his hand over to produce a blue formation plate while quickly making a series of seals with his other hand. "He's going to cast a restriction. Stop him." The monk's expression changed drastically upon seeing what Master Arctic Dragon was doing. He immediately hurled his wooden knocker as he spoke, and it hurtled toward Master Arctic Dragon as a ball of green light. The gentle sound of wood knocking on wood could then be heard. The sound made the listeners' focus waver slightly, making them feel as if their souls were escaping from their bodies. However, all of the cultivators present were extremely powerful, and the old woman came to her senses before even a second knocking sound had been emitted by the wooden knocker. She harumphed coldly and pointed her staff at the wooden knocker, sending a massive burst of yellow sword chi hurtling toward it. As a result, the monk was forced to relinquish his soundwave attacks as he hurriedly injected his magic power into the wooden knocker. The treasure spun in the air before swelling drastically to around 10 feet in size, hurtling toward the sword chi like a massive rock. An explosive sound erupted as the wooden knocker and the sword projection clashed. Meanwhile, Master Arctic Dragon was still making hand seals without pause, and his formation disc was beginning to radiate piercing spiritual light. However, Han Li was not about to let Master Arctic Dragon unleash his restriction as he pleased. He raised a hand and flicked his 5 fingers in quick successions, upon which around a dozen bursts of azure sword chi shot forth from his fingertips, all of which were aimed directly at Master Arctic Dragon. Han Li's Azure Essence Sword Qi transformed into around a dozen azure streaks of light, but were abruptly cut off by several streaks of White Sword Qi as well as 2 black streaks of light, upon which a heated battle ensued. The ones who had cut off Han Li's attack were none other than Bai Mingson and the green-robed man. Han Li's sword Qi was almost all shattered in an instant, and his brows furrowed upon seeing that. He turned his attention away from Master Arctic Dragon and sent several tens of golden flying swords flying out from his sleeve. Those swords subsequently transformed into a barrier of golden light which shielded him as he looked on at Master Arctic Dragon with a cold expression. A loud rumbling suddenly erupted from down below, and Han Li's expression faltered slightly. However, spiritual light then immediately erupted around his body as he rose into the air from the pillar of light upon which he had been standing. Right at this moment, the purple pillar of light down below disappeared, but was replaced by a shimmering circular formation diagram. Han Li was suddenly struck by a powerful suction force from down below, which made his body plummet as if it had been injected full of lead. At the same time, flashes of light erupted around him as peculiar fluctuations radiated through the air. Before he had a chance to do anything, the surrounding scenery suddenly transformed. He found himself standing in midair amid a vast expanse of wind and snow. Countless snowflakes were falling from the sky while the ground below was pristine white. He had somehow appeared in a glacial land. An illusion technique, how interesting. As soon as Han Li landed on the ground below, he began to chuckle to himself, but there wasn't even the slightest hint of a smile on his face. At this moment, the effect of the restriction on his body intensified slightly. If it weren't for the fact that he had cultivated the Bright Jade arts, his body really would be struggling to cope with his current situation. Compared to the gravitational force of the gold-weight spirit wood, this restriction was nothing. The golden swords around Han Li circled through the air at his behest, and the gravitational force weighing down upon him was instantly severed. He began to rise into the air within a ball of golden light. Han Li surveyed his surroundings, blue light shimmering within his narrowed eyes. Everything in sight was a vast expanse of white. There appeared to be no other living person around. He then looked up into the sky to find that there seemed to be no end to the huge snowflakes falling from above. All of a sudden, a burst of blue light erupted from his eyes, and he let loose a low cry as around a dozen streaks of golden light shot forth from the golden ball around him, all of which were flying toward what appeared to be empty space. A string of explosions erupted in the air above, following which intertwining white and golden light began to shimmer as a dozen or so small swords emerged. Those flying swords were only several inches in length, but each and every one of them was extremely translucent, thereby allowing them to camouflage themselves within the wind and snow as they silent hurtled toward Han Li. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D563, letter 1D556, letter 1D4 1E, letter 1D430, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D428, letter 1D46. However, they were still discovered in the end, and Han Li was able to easily keep them at bay. The surprised voice of Bai Mingson sounded from an indeterminate location. Those flying swords whizzed around before disappearing into the wind and snow again. Han Li raised an eyebrow as he made a hand seal. Upon a dozen or so more golden swords flew out from around him, all of which shimmering with golden light and exuding bone-chilling glacial qi. Those swords circled through the air and quickly tracked down the translucent flying swords again as the sound of clashing swords ensued. Golden light erupted from the golden swords at Han Li's behest, and a sharp gleam appeared in his eyes as he began to utter a strange chant. A muffled groan sounded from somewhere within the wind and snow, following which a ball of white light erupted several hundred feet away. A white-robed woman was then revealed, with her hands grasping at her head and a painful expression on her face. She was none other than Bai Mingson, who had been struck by Han Li's spirit-stunned thorn. The woman's spiritual sense was disrupted, and as a result, her flying swords, which were previously on par with Han Li's flying swords, grew significantly weaker. Han Li abruptly injected more energy into his sword, upon seeing that as the dozen or so azure bamboo cloudswarm swords began to exude golden light in unison, while circling around the sluggish ice swords. A loud cracking sound erupted as almost half of the ice swords were snapped in half by the golden flying swords. The remaining few ice swords also dimmed significantly, and began to emit an insistent anguished screech, seemingly as if they had been severely damaged. The woman in white had just regained her senses and was stunned to see her magic treasures being destroyed. She threw up several mouthfuls of blood essence from the backlash, but had no time to pay any heed to her own condition as she hurriedly summoned all of the remaining flying swords back to herself. Otherwise, if all of the flying swords were destroyed, she would sustain far more severe injuries. However, Han Li had already sprung into action. He wasn't going to allow her to simply withdraw her swords without an impediment. He quickly raised his hand and pointed toward the flying swords in the distance. As a result, the Azure Bamboo Cloudswarm swords immediately began to pursue the fleeing ice swords. At the same time, the flying swords without any opponents flew through the air at an extremely fearsome speed, circling around to in front of the ice swords. Thus, the remaining ice swords were sandwiched between the swarms of Azure Bamboo Cloudswarm swords. Han Li activated his sword art again, and just when he was preparing to completely destroy the ice swords with his own flying swords, a thunderous roar suddenly erupted from overhead. "Don't you dare!" Two streaks of black light then flashed through the air as two fierce black worms emerged from the snowflakes overhead. Each of the worms was around 70 to 80 feet in length and were extremely ferocious. Han Li's expression remained calm, as if he had already predicted this attack in advance. He continued to activate his sword art with one hand while suddenly raising his other hand, producing a shiny red scroll in the process. A burst of spiritual light erupted as the treasure was unfurled. A clear cry rang out from within the scroll as over 100 ancient runes that were golden and silver in color flew forth from within. As soon as those ancient runes emerged, they swelled drastically in size before transforming into countless balls of light as they met the oncoming black worms. The two worms didn't hold back either as they blasted streaks of black light from their mouths relentlessly and dove into the swarm of ancient runes. Loud booms rang out incessantly as golden and silver light erupted on the worms' bodies. Not only did they shatter the black light on the bodies of worms, they even managed to send the two worms tumbling through the air. Each and every one of those gold and silver runes possessed devastating power, and the two worms were unable to withstand such a fearsome bombardment, thereby forcing them to revert back to their true form, which was a pair of short black halberds. Han Li was elated upon seeing this, and instantly injected even more magic power into his scroll. The red scroll abruptly fluttered as more ancient runes emerged from within, encompassing a vast expanse of space overhead before shooting forth through the air. Black light flashed as the green-robed middle-aged man was forced to reveal himself amid the ruins with a dark expression on his face. He immediately raised a hand to summon the two short halberds back to him before flipping over his palm, upon which a small green flag abruptly appeared. The flag was only several inches in size, but as it was waved through the air, the runes on its surface instantly began to surge, summoning gusts of violent gale-force winds as the green-robed man disappeared. As such, all of the ancient runes struck empty air. Han Li faltered upon seeing this. On the other end, Han Li's attacks directed against Bai Mengxin had also come to no avail as she had gritted her teeth and suddenly produced a pristine white mirror. She aimed the mirror at the streaks of golden light that were Han Li's flying swords, and she only had to brandish the mirror before a cream-colored pillar of light shot forth from its surface. The streaks of golden light were caught off guard, and upon being illuminated by the pillar of light, layers of frosty ice began to appear on the swords. Most of the flying swords were thus sealed in blocks of ice. Only then did the remaining few ice swords manage to escape, and were instantly absorbed into Bai Mengxin's body. Han Li turned his gaze toward her and harumphed coldly as he pointed toward the distance several times in quick succession. Loud thunderclaps immediately erupted from the small golden swords as thin arcs of lightning surfaced along the swords. The blocks of profound ice were shattered by the might of the divine Devilbane lightning, and the flying swords were instantly freed. Bai Mengxin's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, as she immediately turned her mirror toward Han Li. A loud rumbling erupted behind Han Li as a pair of silver wings appeared. He merely spread and flapped the wings slightly before he disappeared amid a burst of silver light. Bai Mengxin faltered upon seeing this, and almost at the exact same moment, a violent gust of wind swept past her. An arm abruptly reached out from within the wind, latching on her arm and dragging her within. The wind then dissipated and she completely disappeared. In the next instant, a silver arc of light flashed as Han Li emerged where Bai Mengxin had been hovering just a moment ago. He looked at the empty air around him, and a dark expression appeared on his face as a blue light flashed through his eyes. He abruptly raised a hand, and a black streak of light shot forth from within his sleeve before disappearing in a split second. A black streak of light abruptly flashed through the air several hundred feet away, upon which a muffled groan rang out as a severed arm appeared, seemingly from thin air, followed by a stumbling green-robed figure. It was none other than the green-robed middle-aged man. This man was clearly also quite a vicious character. Even though one of his arms had been forcibly amputated, his other arm shot forth like lightning, grabbing onto the severed arm as he disappeared amid another gust of gale-force winds. Cold light flashed through Hanley's eyes, but he didn't manipulate the black streak of light to keep pursuing that man. Instead, he raised a hand, and the black streak of light disappeared on the spot before instantly reappearing in front of Hanley, as if by teleportation. It was a dagger that was several inches in length with inky black light shimmering along its surface. This dagger was none other than the Devil Essence dagger that was meant to be used by the humanoid puppet. Hanley then hovered amid the wind and snow, constantly surveying his surroundings expressionlessly. Blue light was shimmering relentlessly within his eyes, as if he were searching for something. Outside the illusion technique, elsewhere in the formation spell, the green-robed middle-aged man was hurriedly pressing his severed arm against his wound before quickly applying several talismans. A burst of white light circulated around the wound, and the arm was reattached to his body. The green-robed man heaved a long sigh of relief after reattaching his arm. He then turned to Bai Mingson with a concerned look as he said, "What a peculiar treasure. It appears that Junior Marshal Sister Menjiao really wasn't exaggerating. This cultivator with the Han surname really is extremely powerful. Junior Marshal Sister Mingson, are you all right?" A heated flush appeared on Bai Mingson's pale face, and her voice was a little hoarse as she said, "I'm fine. Even though my magic treasure was damaged, I managed to retain almost half of them, so all is not lost. However, I won't be able to summon these profound ice swords in battle again. Senior Marshal Brother, restrictions are completely ineffective against this man, and he seems to possess an ability that allows him to see through illusion techniques. We tried to use the power of the restriction to obscure our presence, but it was completely ineffective." Master Arctic Dragon's entire body was glowing with blue light, but the golden light in his eyes was slowly receding as he said calmly, "I saw everything that happened just then. This opponent is indeed one that is not to be taken lightly. If it weren't for the fact that the Heaven Void Cauldron were concerned, I really wouldn't want to make such a powerful enemy. However, we've made our decision already and there's no going back. I've already dispelled the final shred of backlash from the world's origin chi. Next, you two will only have to assist me, and I'll put an end to this man's life. In my current condition, I should be able to temporarily control all of the profound Jade's glacial chi in the cave, albeit with some difficulty. No matter how powerful this man is, there's no way he'll be able to withstand such a vast amount of profound Jade's glacial chi." The green-robed middle-aged man was quite surprised to hear this. "But if you do that, we won't be able to access the profound Jade Cave for the next 1,000 years. Bai Mingson's expression also changed slightly. Master Arctic Dragon looked into the distance at Hanley, who was trapped within the restriction, with a remarkably calm expression on his face. "There's no helping it. You two have just fought him, so you would have experienced his power firsthand. He's clearly extremely proficient in the art of formation spells, and all of his treasures and abilities are extremely dangerous. Aside from the Heaven Void Cauldron, he also appears to have a spirit treasure replica fan that is also very difficult to deal with. Only through summoning the power of the entire profound Jade Cave would I have absolute confidence in killing him. In comparison with the Heaven Void Cauldron, not being able to access the profound Jade Cave is a small price to pay." The green-robed man and Bai Mingson were still a little hesitant, but they didn't speak further on the matter. Master Arctic Dragon flipped his palm over, and a profound jade badge abruptly appeared in his hand. The mysterious runes on the badge were flashing incessantly, and there was an image of an ice-breathing Qilin carved onto the back. Just as he was about to use the badge to prepare an attack, he took a cursory glance at Hanley, upon which his expression abruptly changed drastically. "We've got trouble. He's discovered the location of the formation core and is about to break free. You two, hurry and fortify the formation spell. Buy me as much time as possible through any means necessary." The green-robed man's expression also changed upon hearing this, as he turned his attention to Hanley. Sure enough, Hanley was making hand seals in the illusion technique, and a huge golden sword several tens of feet in length had appeared above his head. There were countless arcs of lightning flashing over its surface as it slowly came crashing down toward a certain spot in the restriction. The green-robed man's heart jolted with shock, and he knew that he had to act quickly. His sleeve flapped through the air as a green and yellow ball of light shot forth, hurtling directly toward the huge sword. Bai Mengxin also raised a hand, and the white mirror that had sealed Han Li's swords in ice not too long ago appeared again. The surface of the mirror shimmered as several pillars of cream-colored light surged forth violently, aiming directly at Han Li. It appeared that she was trying to attack Han Li, so he would be forced to defend himself rather than target the formation core. As for Master Arctic Dragon, he began to chant as the profound jade rose into the air. White light flashed along its surface, transforming it into a ball of dazzling light. Within the ball of light, the silhouette of a spirit beast was slowly taking shape. At this moment, Han Li's golden sword was already gathering speed as it came crashing down. Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D633, letter 212F, letter 212F, letter 1D464, letter 212F, letter 1D4B7, letter 1D450, letter 2134, letter 1D455A. He was extremely well versed in the art of formation spells, and that, in conjunction with his bright-sight spirit eyes, made it an extremely simple task for him to break through a mere illusion technique. However, in the next instant, the green and yellow ball of light appeared beneath his huge sword. At the same time, several pillars of cream-colored light came hurtling toward him from the wind and snow. Han Li's lips twitched in response as a deriding sneer appeared on his face. A bead that was around the size of a fist was enshrouded within the green and yellow ball of light. This bead was yellow in color, and as it shot forth through the air, the faint sound of thunderclaps could be heard. This was clearly some kind of treasure. However, Han Li did not have any intention of holding back his sword. Instead, he unleashed his sword art, and golden light spilled forth for several feet from the huge sword, creating a resounding boom as it was brought downward. At this moment, the remarkably dense pillars of cream-colored light also reached Han Li in the blink of an eye. Han Li inhaled lightly before opening his mouth to unleash a ball of purple flames. As soon as this ball of purple apex flames was expelled out his mouth, it made a spluttering sound as its size drastically swelled while flying through the air. In the blink of an eye, it had become a massive fireball that was around half the size of a wagon wheel. Following a muffled thump, the purple fireball split apart and shot forth in all directions, instantly transforming into several smaller purple balls of fire that met the oncoming pillars of light. A series of resounding booms erupted as the pillars of light immediately clashed with the purple fireballs. Purple and white light flashed as two types of glacial auras exploded throughout the entire space. Countless flashes of light emerged in midair as bursts of dual-colored glacial energy radiated outward. Meanwhile, the huge golden sword had already struck the yellow bead amid an earth-shattering boom. The clash between the two created a marvelous spectacle. There were golden and green arcs of lightning erupting at the same time around the sword and the bead. The two types of lightning arcs intertwined with one another, instantly forming a massive ball of electricity that was over 100 feet in diameter. Scintillating light flashed as deafening booms erupted. This bead was an extremely rare lightning attribute, ancient treasure. Han Li paid no heed to the glacial energy surging toward him. He merely raised a single hand, and a layer of purple flame surfaced all over his body. The glacial energy was immediately eradicated into nothingness as soon as they approached him. However, the emergence of the massive ball of lightning was quite a surprise to him. What kind of lightning is this? It seems to have some type of origin. To think that it's able to withstand the might of the divine Devilbane lightning. Han Li didn't exert any more might with his huge sword. Instead, he tapped the heaven-void cauldron in front of him with his hand. Following a dull thump, a burst of green threads shot forth, attempting to bind themselves around the bead in order to forcibly capture it. The green-robed, middle-aged man's heart jolted as he saw this from outside the restriction. He immediately relinquished all efforts to conserve magic power as he unleashed several celestial techniques at once, injecting all of his spiritual power into that bead. This lightning bead was a treasure that he had obtained many years ago. Even though he was yet to fully comprehend it, it was already astonishingly powerful, and he didn't want to relinquish it. With the injection of power from the green-robed middle-aged man, the impasse between the two evenly matched balls of lightning was instantly broken. A brilliant burst of green light erupted, looking as if it were going to force back the golden arcs of lightning. However, Han Li's immediately darkened. His sword had been created from condensing over 10 flying swords and possessed the power of the divine Devilbane lightning. As such, It was clearly not something that the green lightning contained within a mere bead could compare with. Hence, he only had to exert more power, and several arcs of golden lightning, with diameters comparable to that of large bowls, surfaced on his sword. They then transformed into several massive golden pythons, which pounced toward the ball of lightning below with devastating force. The green arcs of lightning had only just gained the upper hand when they were struck by the golden pythons. Electricity flashed and thunderous booms erupted before the golden arcs of lightning were completely shredded, revealing the yellow bead once again. Right at this moment, the green threads on the Heaven Void Cauldron came rushing down, as if they had been waiting precisely for this opportunity, and bound the bead before rapidly pulling it backward. The green-robed middle-aged man was extremely flustered to see this, and an urgent look appeared on his face. He began to make a series of hand seals one after the other, and the bead within the green threads began to struggle violently as if it were trying to break free. Bai Mengxin's brows also furrowed with concern in response to this situation. She immediately tapped her hand against the mirror in her other hand before tossing it into the air. A frosty moon appeared overhead, while the surface of the mirror reflected a vast expanse of murky whiteness. Bai Mengxin opened her mouth and exhaled a ball of remarkably pure white energy, which struck the mirror. The sound of serpentine hissing rang out from within the mirror, immediately following which a green light flashed, as if something had escaped from inside the mirror. However, it was moving too quickly for anyone to be able to identify what it was. Han Li was in the process of manipulating the Heaven Void Cauldron to secure the bead when he abruptly turned his head. Brilliant blue light erupted from his eyes as several beams of light suddenly shot forth from the revolving expanse of golden light in front of him. All of them were aimed toward a single target. The beams of golden light suddenly exploded with a resounding over 100 feet in front of him, as if they had struck something. Han Li paid no heed to that as he swiped his sleeve rapidly through the air, forcibly grabbing onto the bead that was trapped in the green threads. He stowed the bead away into his storage pouch before narrowing his eyes as he turned toward the direction where the golden light had exploded. As the golden light receded, he could indistinctly make out several golden flying swords surrounding a strange-looking insect, with which the swords were locked in an intense battle. This insect appeared to be a massive scorpion, except it had 2 tails and 4 wings on its back. 3 was also a pattern on its back that very much resembled a human face. Just the sight of it was enough to send shivers running down one's spine. This completely green scorpion was using its 2 pitch-black venomous tails to create a black shadow, which was shielding its body within it. The azure bamboo cloudswarm swords were extremely sharp and destructive, but they were creating a high-pitched screeching sound as if they were striking something metallic in nature, and were unable to bypass the scorpion's defenses to kill it. "That's a twin-tailed human-face scorpion," Han Li murmured to himself, seemingly slightly surprised. The scorpion was a spirit insect that was ranked at 29th on the spirit insect roll. Due to the fact that it had a set of patterns on its back that resembled a human face, Han Li had a rather deep impression of the insect, which was why he was able to identify it right away. However, the human face patterns on this scorpion's back were still rather indistinct, clearly indicating that it was still in its infantile stages. At Han Li's current power level, he harbored no fear toward any spirit insects below the 20th rank on the spirit insect roll. After a brief flash of surprise, his expression darkened as he patted the spirit insect pouch hanging from his waist. The sound of loud buzzing immediately erupted as a swarm of golden insects flew directly toward the scorpion. The twin-tailed human-faced scorpion seemed to have sensed it was in danger upon catching sight of the swarm of insects, and it let loose a low cry. Its body began to blur, and it completely disappeared from beneath the flying swords. However, it reappeared in the next instant in a location that was over 200 feet away from where it was. This 4-winged spirit insect really was extraordinarily fast. Despite this, Han Li only gave a cold chuckle as he pointed a finger at the swarm of insects. A dull thump immediately rang out from within the insect swarm as countless golden flowers shot forth in all directions, encompassing the region in a radius of over 1,000 feet in the blink of an eye. Countless golden beetles several inches in size surrounded the twin-tailed scorpion in a sinister manner. Bai Mengxin was manipulating the scorpion from afar using her mirror, and she was struck by a sense of foreboding upon seeing this. As such, she immediately tried to manipulate her scorpion to escape from the swarm of beetles. However, it was already too late. All of the gold-devouring beetles buzzed as they converged toward the scorpion from all directions. They weren't very fast, but there was a vast number of them, and they left no gaps for the scorpion to evade or retreat. Thus, the scorpion was forced to transform its tails into a dark shadow again in order to protect itself. It then shuddered as it identified a certain direction to fly toward, attempting to force its way out of the insect swarm as it did so. If these were just ordinary spirit insects, the measures taken by the scorpion would be the most appropriate course of action. However, in the face of sacred bugs like these gold-devouring beetles, it was merely rushing to its death. Due to the fact that it had to wave its tails through the air, the scorpion's speed had been drastically reduced to less than half of what it was. Despite that, it was still able to swat countless beetles flying and rushed ahead for over 100 feet. However, there were only more golden beetles waiting for it, and they traveled along with the scorpion as they threw themselves at it fearlessly. The gold-devouring beetles feared neither the scorpion's venom nor its sharp tails. More and more of them began to cling onto the scorpion's tails with their teeth, causing both the scorpion as well as its twin tails to slow down. In the blink of an eye, a golden sheen had appeared over the entirety of the twin-tailed human-faced scorpion's body, and it finally let loose a shrill cry of despair. Moments later, the scorpion was completely inundated by the sea of beetles and engulfed into nothingness. When the beetles finally flew back upon receiving an instruction from Han Li's spiritual sense, there was only a pair of pitch-black venomous scorpion hooks hanging in midair while exuding a faint light. The hooks were too hard and contained incredibly lethal venom, so even the gold-devouring beetles weren't interested in forcibly devouring it. However, Han Li was quite interested in those two poisonous hooks. He reached out with his hand and clutched at them from afar, netting a pair of demon beast materials for himself. He examined the two hooks briefly before stowing them away into his pouch. He then turned his attention toward the huge golden sword, which was hovering in the distance, completely stationary. He guided it with his spiritual sense, upon which the golden sword unleashed a downward strike. Golden arcs revolved around the sword, lending the slash around 30% more power. Following a loud burst of rumbling, white light abruptly appeared and expanded from the location in the air that had been struck by the sword. Immediately afterward, the snow fluttering through the air was transformed into wisps of light. The surrounding scenery warped once again, and Han Li reappeared in the original formation spell. He had finally escaped from the illusion. Han Li was ecstatic upon making this discovery, but he then immediately surveyed his surroundings. The green-robed middle-aged man had produced a treasure that resembled a gong from his storage pouch and appeared to be preparing to use it. Meanwhile, Bai Mengxin wore a frosty expression on her face as she unleashed a few celestial techniques in quick succession toward the white mirror hovering above her head. Even though the spirit insect living within the mirror had been destroyed, she appeared to still be able to use the mirror to unleash some form of attack. The two of them faltered slightly upon seeing Han Li emerge from the illusion technique, and their expressions changed drastically. Elsewhere, a vast expanse of five-colored light was flashing in an unstable manner as Buddhist chants erupted incessantly within. The battle between the gray-robed monk and the old woman had reached the climax, and it appeared that they were still evenly matched, even though they were inside the restriction. This was rather surprising to Han Li. However, what was most noteworthy to Han Li was Master Arctic Dragon, who was still standing on the giant stone and chanting relentlessly. He was glowering at Han Li with a dark expression, and the silhouette of a white Qilin was already taking shape above his head. At the very center of the Qilin was none other than that profound jade badge. Han Li raised his brows minutely upon seeing that, before silently patting the storage pouch hanging from his waist. A ball of black light instantly shot forth from the pouch, flying in a circle before hovering in front of Han Li. It was a black jade vial, several inches in size. Han Li made a hand seal, and a series of green celestial techniques were cast onto the vial. After spinning around for a while, the opening of the vial was tipped upside down, and a few violent low snarls could be heard emanating from within. Immediately afterward, 5 bursts of gray-white chi emerged, transforming into 5 sets of human skeletons that were as pristine as white jade. The skeletons were only about a foot or so in size when they first appeared, but they quickly swelled to over 20 feet in height. At the same time, the gray-white chi revolving around them bared its fangs, releasing a burst of sinister cackling that struck horror into one's heart. There were 5 shiny silver rings embedded deep into the bones of each skeleton around their necks and their 4 limbs. These were the unbroken sink devils that Han Li had forcibly tamed. As soon as the 5 humanoid skeletons were fully expanded, murky gray demonic energy was expelled from their mouths. They abruptly turned around with vicious looks in their eyes and tried to throw themselves at Han Li. Han Li's expression darkened as he activated the Devil Control Arts. Turbulent waves of green flames were instantly ignited by the 5 silver rings, and the acrid aroma of something being burned wafted through the air. The 5 demons were forced into retreat as a result, while emitting a panicked screeching sound with horrified looks on their faces. Han Li then raised an arm and a green thread emerged from his sleeve, slitting his wrist to inflict a small gash. 5 drops of blood roughly the size of a thumb hurtled through the air, shooting in the huge mouths of the 5 devils with unerring accuracy. The green energy in the eyes of the 5 demons instantly changed, as their expressions became more tame and docile. Go! Han Li pointed toward the green-robed middle-aged man in the distance without any hesitation. Demonic energy tumbled around the 5 demons, and a vicious look appeared in their eyes as they rose into the air. Following a burst of ghastly howling, the 5 demons transformed into ghostly heads that were around the size of wagons. The ghostly heads were all extremely terrifying in appearance, and unsettling screeching noises came out of their mouths as they shot forth straight toward Elder Ren. As they did so, a vast expanse of gray-white chi was swept up behind them, creating an extremely intimidating spectacle to behold. The Unbroken Sync Devils. You killed old Devil Kyan. The green-robed middle-aged man was initially rather perplexed by the sight of the 5 demons. However, he had finally identified them, and was stunned by the conclusion that he had reached. Letter 1D627, letter 1D4C7, letter 1D452, letter 1D452, letter 1D464, letter 212F, letter 1D624, letter 2134, letter 1D62E. The incident regarding Kunwu Mountain seal had affected many parties, and even though the North Night Palace was situated in quite a secluded location, they still very knowledgeable about the incident. During the incident, the Yi clan, widely renowned as the #1 clan of the Great Jin, completely disappeared. Furthermore, the number of nascent soul cultivators who were killed was something that was rarely seen, even in 1,000 years. Most noteworthy among those victims was old Devil Kyan, who was the Grand Elder of the Yin Sifting Sect. His death was a monumental event that had shocked the entire Great Jin. After all, in the eyes of normal cultivators, late nascent soul cultivators were virtually unkillable beings, unless if they were to die of old age. This green-robed middle-aged man just so happened to witness the fearsome might of old Devil Kyan in battle a few years ago, where he had been using the 5 devils. If even old Devil Kyan had fallen by Han Li's hands, then didn't this mean that the latter was even more terrifyingly powerful than a late nascent soul cultivator? The green-robed middle-aged man knew just how powerful the Unbroken Sync devils were, and it was exactly this knowledge that was striking horror into his heart. He immediately tossed his gong into the air without any hesitation. He flipped over his other palm, upon which a yellow jade pestle appeared, which he used to strike the gong from afar. A crisp sound rang out as the gong was struck. Fragments of yellow light abruptly appeared around the green-robed middle-aged man, and after another strike of the gong, those fragments instantly manifested themselves into over 100 yellow flying blades, each of which was roughly the size of a willow leaf. The blades were all shimmering with a cold light, and they appeared to be as thin as cicada wings, but also extremely lethal at the same time. The sound of the gong being struck then rang out repeatedly in quick succession. The flying blades instantly twirled and danced in the air, creating an impenetrable net of blades that shielded the green-robed middle-aged man within. However, that still wasn't enough to make him feel safe. He unleashed the 2 black halberds from his sleeve, which transformed into 2 streaks of black light that set up another barrier behind the net of blades. He was retreating into his shell much like a cowardly turtle. It appeared that the emergence of the Unbroken Sync devil had completely crushed his fighting spirit, and he was now solely prioritizing his survival in the face of the 5 devils. Amid a burst of eerie screeching, the 5 ghostly heads instantly arrived before the green-robed middle-aged man. All 5 of them opened their mouths in unison, and the gray and white demonic energy immediately inundated their target. The 5 ghostly heads then also rushed into the vast expanse of demonic energy themselves. The sounds of explosions and ghostly howls rang out incessantly from within the tumbling mass of demonic energy. After Han Li issued a command to the Unbroken Sync devils, he no longer paid any heed to them. The 5 devils were powerful enough to combat a late nascent soul cultivator, so they would be able to handle a mid-nascent soul cultivator with ease. Meanwhile, Master Arctic Dragon and Bai Mingxin's expressions were just as grave as the green-robed man's upon seeing Han Li's Unbroken Sync devils. Thai had never seen the Unbroken Sync devils in person, but their origins became quite clear to the two of them when they saw the 5 ghastly devils and heard the green-robed man yell out their name. Master Arctic Dragon was powerful enough to not have to fear the 5 devils, but he was at a critical juncture in preparing his attack, so he was unable to do anything. In contrast, Bai Mingxin's motions had faltered in her shock, and the attack that she was halfway through preparing was unconsciously terminated. It appeared that she already come to the realization that normal attacks would definitely be unable to pose a threat to Han Li. Unleashing them would simply be a waste of her magic power. However, Han Li was not going to afford her any time to catch her breath. He immediately made another hand seal and manifested 4 identical green silhouettes which split up into 2 groups, charging toward Bai Mingxin and Master Arctic Dragon respectively. As for Han Li himself, he remained standing on the same spot, but he whipped out his sleeve to stow away the heaven void cauldron hovering before him. A feather fan then appeared in his other hand, following a burst of 3-colored flames. At the same time, Han Li gave a powerful flap of his thunderstorm wings, upon which he transformed into a silver arc and disappeared on the spot. Bai Mingxin's heart jolted in shock upon seeing that. She had already witnessed Han Li's teleportation ability through the use of his thunderstorm wings, an ability that he had used while trapped in the illusion technique, and she did not dare to treat the situation lightly. Furthermore, she was also unable to tell whether the 4 blurry clone-like silhouettes were merely illusions or actual clones. In any case, she absolutely didn't want to allow them to get close to her. Thus, she immediately flicked several of her fair and slender fingers. The sound of projectiles piercing through the air could be heard as 4 streaks of light shot forth toward the 4 green silhouettes. The streaks of light were some sort of unidentified treasures in the form of sharp spikes. Her body then flashed, and in the next instant, she appeared on the massive stone down below, standing shoulder to shoulder with Master Arctic Dragon. She made a series of hand seals with a grave expression on her face, conjuring up a layer of white ice flames. The flames then materialized into an ice mountain that was as pristine white as jade, shielding both herself and Master Arctic Dragon within. After doing all that, the woman raised her hands into the air and clumps of silver thread shot forth, intertwining with one another in midair. In the blink of an eye, a spherical net of threads was formed, encapsulating her within it. She was employing the same all-out defensive tactic adopted by the green-robed man. It was clear that she had also lost the courage to face Han Li on her own. She was pinning her hopes entirely on Master Arctic Dragon, hoping that the power of the profound Jade Cave in conjunction with Master Arctic Dragon's attack would be able to destroy this enemy, who was far more fearsome than they had anticipated. The 4 streaks of light were extremely fast and struck the 4 green silhouettes almost instantly. 3 of the 4 streaks of light simply passed through their targets, while the final silhouette adjusted its trajectory slightly to evade the sharp spike, before continuing on toward Master Arctic Dragon. At this moment, the facial features of the silhouette had already been revealed. It was a middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance in a set of green robes. Its aura was completely concealed, and its body was erratic and insubstantial, as if it were a ghostly wraith. This was a humanoid puppet that had been intermingled with the other illusionary silhouettes by Han Li, in an attempt to deal his opponents a heavy blow. Han Li didn't know what kind of secret technique Master Arctic Dragon was preparing, but just the white Killin's silhouette taking shape above his head was definitely something out of the ordinary. He was confident that, in his ability to defend himself, even if all of the cultivators in the cave were to attack him at once, but he definitely wasn't going to stand around and watch as his opponent prepared an attack against him. Thus, he immediately unleashed 2 of his trump cards at once without any hesitation. Bai Mingxin was stunned by the sight of the humanoid puppet, which completely resembled a real person. She didn't have time to consider how an unknown cultivator had suddenly appeared in the cave, before hurriedly pointing a finger toward the 4 streaks of light in the distance. The streaks of light immediately completed a U-turn before hurtling toward the humanoid puppet from behind. However, the latter simply ignored the oncoming sharp spikes and flipped over a palm, upon which a small bow enshrouded in crimson flames appeared in its hand. It then raised its head and aimed before shooting at the ice mountain before it. A rumbling boom erupted as countless flaming arrows shot through the air. A small segment of the entire sky had been stained completely crimson as a scorching aura permeated forth. The Thunderfire bow was a treasure that was definitely not inferior to a top-grade ancient treasure, and it was finally revealing its devastating might. Bai Mingxen's pupils contracted as she looked on from within the ice mountain she had conjured up. The unknown cultivator was paying no heed to the threat approaching him from behind, so Bai Mingxen gritted her teeth and forced the 4 streaks of light into further acceleration. If she could kill this man, then the attacks he had unleashed would be automatically dispelled. Of course, she hadn't forgotten about Han Li, either. She was quite wary of the fact that he had just disappeared using his thunderstorm wings, and she had already unleashed her mid-nascent soul stage spiritual sense, which encompassed everything within a radius of 300 feet. She was doing so in order to defend herself against sneak attacks. However, an astonishing scene then ensued. The 4 streaks of light managed to strike the unknown cultivator squarely on the back. However, a 5-colored barrier of light suddenly surfaced over his body, immediately following which 4 loud explosions erupted in quick succession as the streaks of silver light instantly intertwined with one another. However, the cultivator's body only wobbled slightly within the 5-colored barrier before he was able to shrug off the attacks as if nothing had happened. The 4 spiked treasures were unable to penetrate that peculiar barrier of light. Bai Mingxen was very stunned to see this, and she wanted to react, but it was already too late. The swarm of fiery arrows had already descended and crashed heavily onto her ice mountain. Resounding booms rang out one after another as boundless crimson flames tumbled over the surface of the ice mountain. The arrows then transformed into clumps of scorching fiery clouds, making it appear as if the ice mountain were situated within a sea of fire. Bai Mingxen looked on at the clouds of fire, but her expression remained calm. She knew that these fiery clouds were very powerful, but they would definitely be unable to bypass the defenses she had created with her glacial flames. As she expected, the crimson flames continued to surge in turbulent waves, but they were unable to vanquish the ice mountain. They were only able to make white light shimmer over its surface. A glint of light flashed through Bai Mingxen's eyes as a faint smug smile appeared on her face. However, right at this moment, a thunderclap suddenly erupted roughly 100 feet behind the ice mountain, where a silver arc surfaced. A humanoid figure who was entirely enshrouded in purple flames emerged from the silver arc, before flying toward the ice mountain without any hesitation. This person was naturally none other than Han Li, who had appeared behind her using his lightning movement technique. He used the humanoid puppet to draw Bai Mingxen's attention while he approached his opponent. However, Bai Mingxen had been on high alert for a surprise attack from Han Li this entire time, and as soon as he appeared behind her, she was able to react as she gripped the air toward him without even turning around. A massive, glittering and translucent crystalline hand immediately appeared outside the ice mountain before closing in on Han Li. She wasn't naive enough to believe that this attack would actually be able to defeat her enemy. She was merely using it to slow down Han Li and buy time for herself. However, Han Li paid the massive hand no heed at all. He whipped out his sleeves expressionlessly, and a projectile shot forth from within, slicing the hand in half in the blink of an eye. Han Li was able to crash into the ice mountain without any delay, as the purple flames all over his body abruptly multiplied in quantity. An incredible scene ensued. Han Li's body only faltered slightly before passing through the ice mountain as if there were nothing there. His body flashed through the air a few times, and he was able to somehow pass through the ice mountain, appearing right before Bai Mingxen and Master Arctic Dragon. During his blitzkrieg assault, he had left a hole in the ice that was roughly 10 feet in diameter. It appeared that even though the purple apex flames had never been refined, it was still vastly more powerful than Bai Mingxen's glacial flames, and it allowed him to bypass her defenses with ease. All of a sudden, he had appeared right in front of the spherical barrier of silver threads. An urgent expression appeared on Bai Mingxen's face as she made a hand seal while yelling the word, "Withdraw." Brilliant light erupted from the barrier of threads as all of its constituent threads contracted toward the center, forming a massive silver ball without any openings in front of Han Li. Han Li was slightly taken aback upon seeing this, but he then chuckled coldly as 3-colored light radiated from his hand. He twirled his feather fan, which then expanded at a drastic rate, transforming into a massive fan over 10 feet in size. At the same time, he swatted the fan gently through the air toward the silver ball. A pillar of 3-colored flames came hurtling forth amid a spluttering sound. Golden, silver, and red symbols were intermingled and flashed within the flames as they struck the silver ball. Han Li didn't know what kind of treasure this silver ball was, but in the face of the spirit treasure replica that was the Triflame fan, It emitted a loud ringing sound as well as a dazzling silver light that crashed into the three colored flames, managing to temporarily keep them at bay. It was immediately apparent that the silver ball was struggling to cope with the three colored flames, but it also managed to stay resolute for now, as opposed to being instantly punctured or melted. Han Li's brows furrowed upon seeing this, but they quickly relaxed. He had only injected a small amount of magic power into the Triflame fan, unleashing an attack that was only roughly 10% of what it was normally capable of. Thus, he was a little taken aback by this result, but not overly surprised. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li raised the jade vial in his other hand, which he had prepared well in advance, and instantly poured a drop of myriad-year spirit milk into it. He then injected his magic power into the fan, without any reservation. The Triflame fan tremored as it let loose a pleasing cry. A three-colored bird of fire emerged from the fan in a leisurely fashion, before flying along the pillar of flames toward the silver ball. Meanwhile, Han Li spread open his thunderstorm wings again and disappeared from the spot amid a clap of thunder, virtually at the exact same moment that a burst of brilliant three-colored light exploded. In the next instant, a silver arc appeared over 300 feet away, within which Han Li's body re-emerged. He turned toward the spot that he had previously been located to find that the ice mountain had been completely inundated under three-colored light. Furthermore, it was melting at a rapid rate and was quickly reduced to nothingness. As for the silver ball, due to the fact that it was situated right at the center of the explosion of light, it had been instantly destroyed by the devastating explosive force. However, Han Li did not express any pleasure upon seeing this. Instead, his pupils contracted and his fingers tightened around his Triflame fan. This was because, after the silver ball had disappeared, a blue ice worm several tens of feet had appeared in its place. The scales on the front half of the worm's body were translucent, but the lower half of its body was covered in some sort of viscous blue liquid, while its tail was protruding out of a small cauldron. It appeared that this spirit beast had been released from this cauldron. The small cauldron was hovering in front of Master Arctic Dragon, and it was none other than a second celestial blue cauldron. Furthermore, it was shielding Bai Mengson and Master Arctic Dragon within it. Even though most of the blue worm's body was also melted into nothingness in the blink of an eye, the power within the three-colored light had also been completely exhausted. Thanks to the worm's glacial power, Master Arctic Dragon had managed to remain completely unscathed in the face of the Triflame fan's devastating might. So this is that fire attribute spirit fan. As expected of a spirit treasure replica, it is indeed very powerful. Just its offensive might alone places it above my celestial blue cauldron, Master Arctic Dragon remarked in an indifferent voice. He then suddenly opened his mouth to spit out a ball of blue flames, which immediately found its way onto what remained of the blue worm's body. The blue flames revolved incessantly over the worm's body, while the latter released a long cry. Its ruined body was instantly regenerated by the blue flames, upon which it turned to appraise Han Li with a vicious expression in its green eyes. A peculiar expression intermingled with a deriding sneer appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. Before Master Arctic Dragon had even figured out what was happening, a green silhouette suddenly emerged in the air behind him before pouncing toward him. A hand pierced through the air directly toward Master Arctic Dragon's back like a shiny silver blade, while the other hand produced a small silver shield, which instantly transformed into a silver curtain of light that came crashing down toward Bai Mengson's head. The green puppet had unleashed these attacks completely soundlessly, as if it were merely a gentle breeze blowing by. As a result, neither of its targets were able to sense its approach. It was able to use the distraction created by the fiery clouds, and Han Li's attacks to sneak up on its prey. Bai Mengson had clearly been caught completely off guard, and only after being completely trapped in the curtain of silver light did a panicked expression appear on her face. She hurriedly conjured up a layer of white ice flames all over her body, which instantly transformed into countless fireballs roughly the size of fists before hurtling toward the silver curtain of light around her. A series of loud booms erupted within the curtain of light. However, the curtain of light transitioned between an extremely thick form and a smooth mirror-like form, thus either nullifying the white fireballs or reflecting them back at Bai Mengson. She was clearly unable to escape from her predicament in the short term. As a man who was close to becoming a deity transformation cultivator, Master Arctic Dragon was clearly far more equipped to defend himself than Bai Mengson was. As such, as soon as the humanoid puppet appeared, he was able to detect it with his powerful spiritual sense. His heart jolted with shock, and there as no time for him to manipulate the blue worm to combat the enemy, so he could activate a suit of shiny golden armor over his body. At the same time, he tried to evade the humanoid puppet's lightning-fast attack. However, the puppet was moving extremely quickly and shadowed Master Arctic Dragon's movements. The latter was still making hand seals, so his speed of movement was naturally hampered as a result. Thus, a dull thump erupted as the shiny silver palm struck his shoulder, sending bright silver light cascading in all directions. The humanoid puppet was refined predominantly from tail silver, with a few other rare ingredients thrown into the mix. As such, the might of its palm was definitely not inferior to that of a normal flying sword treasure. However, its attack was only able to trigger a series of ripples on the surface of the golden armor before being deflected away. Despite that, the immense force behind its hand still forced the late nascent soul cultivator to stumble back in retreat. However, Master Arctic Dragon was actually quite relieved by this development. He attempted to terminate his hand seals so he could spare his magic power and use it to combat his enemy. Even though the process wasn't yet complete, he had already gained control over more than half of the cold chi in the cave, which should have been enough to eradicate his enemy. As he began to employ this change in tactics, the humanoid puppet's other hand lashed out like lightning and struck his other shoulder, only to be kept at bay by the golden armor again. Master Arctic Dragon faltered slightly and was wondering why his assailant would do this, when brilliant silver light suddenly erupted from the puppet's hands. The light transformed into two extremely sharp silver hooks which were hooked onto Master Arctic Dragon's shoulders. Even though the golden armor was protecting him, Master Arctic Dragon's mobility was still hampered by those hooks. Almost at the exact same moment, spiritual light flashed above Master Arctic Dragon as a black dagger appeared overhead. The dagger tremored slightly before stabbing viciously down toward the top of his head, traveling at an insanely fast speed. Meanwhile, Master Arctic Dragon was completely unable to move, as the humanoid puppet's silver hooks had latched onto his golden armor. Master Arctic Dragon really was terrified this time. He immediately relinquished his strategy to slowly mobilize the spiritual power in his body. Instead, he hurriedly raised his head and roared as he threw up a streak of crimson light directly above him. This crimson light was manifested from a mouthful of Master Arctic Dragon's blood essence and was imbued with a vast amount of spiritual power. A dull thump erupted as the black dagger struck the crimson projectile, causing the devil essence dagger to falter amid a burst of black and red light. Letter 1D557, letter 1D42B, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D604, letter 1D41A, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D696. The spiritual light flashing on Master Arctic Dragon's golden armor was just about to recede, and this coincided with the moment that he managed to struggle free from the hooks, thereby averting that crisis. At the same time, the blue ice worm was manipulated to pounce toward Han Li while unleashing a ferocious roar. The worm reared up and unleashed a blue pillar of light even before it had gotten close to Han Li. Master Arctic Dragon firmly believed that if he could slightly slow Han Li down, he would be able to use the cold chi in the cave to instantly turn the tables and kill his opponent. However, right at this moment, a silver lotus flower around a foot in diameter suddenly appeared about 100 feet below Master Arctic Dragon. It spun on the spot before emitting a bright burst of silver light, as well as a string of Buddhist chants. Master Arctic Dragon was instantly struck by the feeling that his body had become impossibly heavy, rendering him completely immobilized. At the same time, he had lost control over most of the magic power in his body. As a result of this, the crimson arrow that was still combating the black dagger became significantly weaker. Thus, the devil essence dagger was able to vanquish the weakened crimson arrow before continuing downward without any further impediment. Master Arctic Dragon's face paled with horror as a wail of anguish escaped his mouth. In the face of such a perilous situation, Master Arctic Dragon unleashed some sort of body refinement technique, allowing him to twist his neck aside just as the demon essence dagger was about to embed itself into his head. As a result, his neck elongated over a foot like the neck of a monster, presenting a very bizarre sight to behold. Black light flashed past, and the flying dagger sliced open through Master Arctic Dragon's neck, sending his head tumbling to the ground. The golden armor materialized over his body, and that blue ice worm in the distance both disappeared in the blink of an eye. A smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. However, the smile had only surfaced for a split second before it abruptly stiffened. This was because a burst of golden light had suddenly erupted from the severed head, enveloping the entire head. It spun on the spot before hurtling toward the Killen silhouette overhead. Han Li was naturally rather surprised to see something so peculiar. However, he quickly understood what was happening. His opponent's nascent soul was hidden within his head. Han Li's expression darkened as a layer of green light surfaced over his body. At the same time, he uttered a single word: break. His voice wasn't very loud, but when it traveled into the severed head's ears, it felt as if its spiritual sense had been viciously stabbed by a sharp spike, resulting in a burst of excruciating pain. A blood-curdling howl immediately escaped from the head's mouth, as blood began to flow from its ears and nose. Without his body support, Master Arctic Dragon was in a severely debilitated state, and in the face of a full-power strike from Han Li's spiritual spike, he was completely no match. His head wobbled in the air, as the blue flames surrounding it wavered unsteadily. Right at this moment, the black dagger appeared again above Master Arctic Dragon's head. The dagger then disappeared right as an expression of shock and horror surfaced on the head. In the next instant, it appeared on the other side of the head. A thin, bloody gash appeared at the center of the head's face, and it was becoming wider and wider. Almost at the exact same time, a thunderclap erupted as Han Li emerged several tens of feet away from the head amid a silver arc of light. He then immediately rubbed his hands together before raising them in unison. More loud thunderclaps rang out as a massive net of lightning descended from above. The head was split in half down the middle, and a ball of blue light enveloped Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul, which came flying out from within. The nascent soul opened its small mouth, and a blue flying sword shot forth. The flying sword expanded drastically in size, transforming into a sword that was roughly 10 feet in length before slashing toward the golden net without any reservation. Before the huge sword had even struck, the astonishing spiritual pressure emanating from the sword was already enough to make the golden net tremor unsteadily. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he injected more magic power into the net, making the golden arcs of lightning even bulkier. Following a resounding boom, the blue and golden lights clashed. As expected, the huge blue sword was extremely powerful. It was able to force a gash into the golden net after a few violent slashes. Even though the gash was only a foot or so in size, it was more than enough for the nascent soul to fit through. The nascent soul made a hand seal, upon which its body abruptly disappeared. Over 100 feet away from the golden net, blue light flashed as the nascent soul reappeared. It was able to unleash a teleportation technique, saving itself in the nick of time. A mixture of lingering fear and relief appeared on the nascent soul's face, and it waved its soft little hand, gesturing toward the huge sword behind it. The blue flying sword immediately shrank as it attempted to fly out from the gash it had just created. A cold look surfaced in Han Li's eyes as he harumphed and made a hand seal. Loud thunderclaps erupted once again from the nearby golden net, and at the same time, the net contracted inward, instantly mending the gash that had just appeared. Countless golden arcs of lightning then converged toward the blue flying sword, layer after layer, seemingly with no end in sight. The flying sword had been refined by Master Arctic Dragon for many years, so its might far exceeded that of a normal treasure, but it was still struggling to cope in the face of so many golden arcs of lightning. The spiritual light on its surface dimmed and brightened erratically before it was finally completely inundated under golden light. Han Li then waved a hand through the air, and the heaven-void cauldron appeared before him. A burst of green threads shot forth from the cauldron under Han Li's command, rushing toward the nascent soul of Master Arctic Dragon, which was situated over 100 feet away. Master Arctic Dragon was desperately trying to recover his magic treasure when his heart jolted with shock at the sight of the oncoming green threads. He cast a reluctant glance toward the flying sword, but could only grit his teeth as blue light flashed around his body, causing him to disappear again. In the next instant, the nascent soul appeared beside the celestial blue cauldron on the other side. This time, it turned rather hesitantly toward the Killen silhouette, which was located on the spot where he had originally stood. Even though his celestial technique had been disrupted and his physical body had been destroyed, the profound jade badge within the Killen was still flashing with spiritual light, having been completely unaffected by what was befalling him. However, in the next instant, a green figure appeared beside the Killen silhouette, glaring directly at the nascent soul with cold, expressionless eyes. Their eyes met, and Master Arctic Dragon shivered as his heart sank. The final shred of hope in his heart had been eradicated, and his nascent soul immediately squirmed into the cauldron without any hesitation. The cauldron then began to emit a strange cry as it suddenly rose into the air by itself. It flashed several times in quick succession and appeared at the opening of the cave. The green threads were completely unable to keep up with the consecutive teleportation techniques the nascent soul had unleashed, and they dissipated in the process. Han Li had already trapped the flying sword within his divine Devilbane lightning. He turned his attention toward the nascent soul, and his lips twitched slightly as a clap of thunder rang out from his back. He then transformed into a silver arc of light, heading directly toward the nascent soul. Master Arctic Dragon naturally wasn't going to stand still and wait for Han Li to hunt him down. He manipulated the cauldron to transform into a ball of blue light before flying high into the air. After 2 more instances of teleportation, it was close to the entrance. Meanwhile, Han Li was still around 700 to 800 feet behind him. Master Arctic Dragon was quite relieved to see this, and just as he was about to teleport again, a few strands of glacial light suddenly swept toward the cauldron from the nearby profound jade ore. Master Arctic Dragon didn't pay much heed to this glacial chi. The blue flames on the small cauldron burned slightly more fiercely in an attempt to keep the glacial chi at bay. However, right at this moment, a startling and abrupt change struck. The wisps of profound jade's glacial chi changed colors in the blink of an eye, transforming into crimson flames in a split second. The crimson flames then merged right into the celestial ice flames on the surface of the cauldron, as if there were nothing there. The crimson flames flashed and entered cauldron as fast as lightning. The celestial blue cauldron shuddered, following a cry of shock and rage belonging to Master Arctic Dragon erupted from within. The blue and crimson flames immediately surfaced on the cauldron, before intertwining with one another in a series of loud explosions. Spiritual light erupted from the cauldron, and it expanded drastically as it shuddered, transforming into a cauldron several feet in size in the blink of an eye. Half of the cauldron was dominated by blue flames, while the other half was under siege from crimson flames. Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul appeared within the blue flames. It turned to face the crimson flames, with an expression of shock and fury on its face. Within the crimson flames, a fire raven roughly the size of a fist emerged. It let loose a few low cries and seemed to be rather carefree and relaxed. In a life-and-death situation like this, Master Arctic Dragon couldn't afford to waste time by engaging in a prolonged battle. A sharp cry escaped from the nascent soul's mouth as blue flames swept viciously toward the fire raven. The latter flapped a wing nonchalantly, and the crimson flames around its body also swept forth. The blue and crimson flames clashed amid a flurry of scintillating light and resounding booms, resulting in an extremely intense battle. The fire raven was none other than a manifestation of that wisp of Gradian True Flame. The wisp of True Flame had already entered the sentient stage and had been summoned by Han Li using a formation spell, before lying in ambush at the opening of the cave. It used the profound jade's glacial chi that it had absorbed during the past few days as a decoy before launching a surprise attack, and sure enough, the plan worked to perfection. There wasn't enough Gradian True Flame to instantly wrest control over the cauldron from Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul, but it was able to prevent the cauldron from making its escape. Right at this moment, Han Li unleashed his lightning movement technique several times in quick succession, which allowed him to get close to the cauldron in the blink of an eye at the expense of a heightened magic power expenditure. A panicked expression appeared on the face of the nascent soul as it realized that it would be unable to wrest back the celestial blue cauldron in a short time. All of a sudden, a ball of blue light shot forth from the cauldron, fleeing high into the air. The nascent soul had relinquished the cauldron and was running for its life. A peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. He then immediately raised a hand to summon a small green ruler. Han Li recited a chant in a low voice, and at the same time, 7-colored Buddhist light shimmered within his hands. Brilliant green light radiated from the small green ruler, and it tremored slightly before disappearing from his hand. In the next instant, it appeared in the air directly above Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul. The nascent soul was stunned to see this, and it made a hand seal in an attempt to teleport away. However, the green ruler overhead tremored slightly, and a silver lotus flower with a diameter comparable to that of a bowl emerged. The lotus began to spin and Buddhist chants rang out. At the same time, a 7-colored film of light emanated from the lotus flower. Master Arctic Dragon could sense his true essence congeal as his nascent soul was struck by the Buddhist light, making it extremely sluggish and immobile. The nascent soul's face immediately paled. Silver arcs of lightning flashed in the air above as Han Li emerged, looking down with a cold expression. This green ruler was naturally the eighth spirit ruler that Han Li had just obtained recently. Even though he had only successfully cultivated the first layer of the artifact imprint technique, he was still able to unleash astonishing power with it. In terms of pure offensive might alone, it was even superior to the Heaven Void Cauldron. Of course, he was only able to control a late nascent soul cultivator so easily mostly, because the latter had been reduced to a nascent soul state. Furthermore, he had already expended most of his magic power trying to unleash a secret technique to gain control over the glacial chi within the profound Jade Cave, thereby debilitating him even further. Otherwise, it would not be so easy to capture the nascent soul of a late nascent soul cultivator. After using the eighth spirit ruler to capture the nascent soul, Han Li didn't waste any time with words as he immediately raised a hand and spread open his fingers. Golden light flashed over his fingertips as low, rumbling thunderclaps erupted. 5 arcs of lightning shot forth, transforming into small golden serpents around the same thickness as human thumbs. They sank their fangs into the nascent soul trapped within the Buddhist light before transforming again into golden chains, binding the nascent soul securely to the spot. Han Li didn't stop there. He whipped out several restriction talismans from his sleeve, upon which restrictive spiritual light of several different colors began to flash on the nascent soul's body. Han Li patted his storage pouch and flipped over his palm to reveal a dozen or so silver needles in his hand. Streaks of silver light flashed through the air as the silver needles pierced into various vital regions on the nascent soul's body. Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul immediately began to spasm uncontrollably as the light in its eyes dimmed. Only after seeing this was Han Li convinced that his work had been done. He clapped his hands together, and a half-smile appeared on his face. The nascent soul looked with a resentful expression as Han Li stowed away his green ruler before descending from above. Its lips were tightly sealed as it glowered coldly at Han Li. Master Arctic Dragon clearly knew that there was no point in begging for Han Li to spare him. There was no way that Han Li would let him go no matter how much he pleaded, and doing so would only bring more humiliation upon himself. His only regret was that he didn't unleash a secret technique to put an end to his own nascent soul before it was captured. Now that his nascent soul had been completely immobilized by Han Li, self-detonation was nothing more than a distant dream. Han Li looked at Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul with a smile on his face, but he didn't say anything. Instead, his sleeve rustled as he produced a small green vial, which flew through the air and appeared above the nascent soul in a flash. Han Li pointed a finger at the vial, and a burst of white light emerged from its opening, absorbing Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul into the vial. Han Li raised his hand and gestured toward the celestial blue cauldron in the distance. The wisp of Gradian true flame immediately carried the cauldron toward him before disappearing into his sleeve. Only then did Han Li stow away the green vial treasure, before descending as a streak of green light. A moment later, a green light flashed as Han Li re-emerged atop a pile of rubble before surveying his surroundings with furrowed brows. Bai Mingxin, who had been trapped within the silver curtain of light, lay sprawled on a pile of rubble nearby. Blood was gushing from a puncture wound on her lower abdomen with a diameter comparable to the size of a bowl, and it was quite clear this was nothing more than a dead body. Furthermore, the body was entirely devoid of blood essence and energy, thereby indicating that her nascent soul had already escaped. Han Li turned his attention toward the Kilin silhouette, beside which the puppet stood on the spot, completely stationary, as if it hadn't taken a single step away from where it was standing since Han Li's departure. However, the Telstar Essence shield and Devil Essence dagger hovering in front of it were shimmering with faint spiritual light. Roughly 400 to 500 feet away, 5 sets of human skeletons were swaying as they stood shoulder to shoulder next to one another. The vast expanse of gray and white demonic energy in the air had already disappeared. One of the skeletons was holding a green storage pouch in its hand, while another was examining a small ball of black flames in its hands, which was flashing as it dimmed and brightened intermittently. Han Li's furrowed brows quickly relaxed. He scanned through the surrounding area with his spiritual sense before forging a spiritual connection with the puppets, upon which he instantly understood what had just taken place. It turned out that Bai Mingxin finally succumbed to her horror upon seeing Master Arctic Dragon's physical body being destroyed, and she forcibly broke through the curtain of light cast by the Tailstar Essence shield at the expense of detonating several ancient treasures in an attempt to flee. However, prior to Han Li's departure to pursue Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul, the humanoid puppet had received strict instructions not to let anyone get away. Thus, it immediately attacked using the Devil Essence dagger, catching Bai Mingson by surprise and puncturing her lower abdomen, destroying her physical body in the process. After that, her nascent soul escaped her body, only to be blasted into nothingness by an arrow shot from Puppet's Thunderfire bow, thereby completely wiping away her existence off the face of this world. As for the green-robed middle-aged man, he was ultimately unable to withstand the attacks from the five devils, and in the end, his physical body, nascent soul, and the treasures he was carrying were all completely engulfed by the five devils. Only his storage pouch and his remaining shred of glacial flames were left behind. After figuring out what had happened, Han Li heaved a sigh of relief and wordlessly gestured toward the five devils. The storage pouch and black glacial flames in their hands immediately flew toward him at his behest. Han Li examined the storage pouch momentarily before stuffing it into his pocket. He was more interested in the ball of black glacial flames. After a brief hesitation, he rubbed his hands together. Loud thunderclaps erupted as countless thin arcs of golden lightning shot forth from his hands, ensnaring the black flames within to form a golden ball around the size of a fist. He patted his storage pouch and produced a glacial profound ice box, which he tossed the golden ball into before stowing the box away again. He then turned his attention toward Bai Mingson's body. After a brief hesitation, he swept a sleeve through the air, hurled forth a crimson fireball. The body was instantly enshrouded in scorching flames amid a faint spluttering sound, but a ball of white flames then immediately squirmed out of her body. It tumbled through the air, dousing the surrounding flames, before converging to form a white fireball again as it tried to squirm back into the body. That was none other than Bai Mingson's glacial phoenix flame. As expected, following the destruction of her soul, the remnants of the glacial flame had returned to her body. However, Han Li was prepared for this situation, and he wasn't about to let the glacial flames retreat back to their host. He spread open his hand before closing his fingers, feigning a grabbing motion as he reached for the flames from afar. A huge hand materialized from purple apex flames immediately appeared in the air above the glacial flames, before descending at an astonishing speed. The ball of white flames was instantly ensnared by the hand before the latter flew back through the air. Han Li feigned a grabbing motion with his hand again, and the storage pouch on her body also rose into the air before landing in his hand. As for this ball of glacial phoenix flames, Han Li employed the same method again, ensnaring it within a ball of divine devilbane lightning before sealing it away in a profound icebox. Most of the glacial flames had dissipated due to the fact that their owner had perished, but the remnants were the purest of those flames. If he could use them or merge them into his purple apex flames, his combat prowess would be enhanced once again. Of course, this wasn't the time to be conducting such experiments. Lastly, Han Li examined Master Arctic Dragon's body. What came as a surprise to him was that the gold-winged raccoon he had been rather wary of wasn't in Master Arctic Dragon's spirit beast pouch. He didn't know why that was the case, but he couldn't be bothered to ponder the notion as he stowed away Master Arctic Dragon's storage pouch as well. After doing that, Han Li turned toward the Qilin silhouette and that profound jade badge, upon which a grave expression appeared on his face. This silhouette was an inanimate object, but it was imbued with an astonishing amount of spiritual power. Furthermore, it was rather peculiar in that it seemed to have been materialized from some type of glacial qi, but also appeared as if it had been manifested from pure spiritual power. He was unable to identify what its true constituents comprised. After a brief hesitation, he slowly raised a hand and golden light flashed over his fingertips as he prepared to unleash a streak of sword qi to test its reaction. However, right at this moment, a burst of crimson flames suddenly shot forth from his sleeve before disappearing into the Qilin silhouette. A flash of red light then appeared, manifesting into a fire raven. This was the spirit beast manifested from the Gradian true flame. The fire raven appeared to be thoroughly enjoying itself within the Qilin silhouette. As red light flashed from the feathers all over its body, it began to absorb the surrounding white qi, which the Qilin silhouette was comprised of. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and he put down his hand. After a brief hesitation, he decided to let the fire raven do as it wished while he turned his attention to the five-colored barrier of light in the distance. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D4E, letter 1D65A, letter 1D66C, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4ATF, letter 1D484, letter 1D490, letter 1D4F6. The commotion ringing out from within the restriction had died down slightly, but it still hadn't completely stopped. It appeared that the gray-robed monk and the old woman were still locked in a heated battle. Due to the fact that they were obscured within the restriction, the two of them hadn't yet realized that the battle outside had already concluded, nor could they have possibly imagined that the mid-nascent soul Han Li would be capable of slaying a late-nascent soul and two mid-nascent soul opponents. Only roughly 10 minutes had passed since the commencement of the battle. Green light erupted from Han Li's body as he shot forth as a green streak of light, arriving above the five-colored barrier of light in the blink of an eye before surveying the situation down below. A cold smile then appeared on his face as a humanoid puppet and 5 skeletons flew toward him at his behest. At the same time, 36 small golden swords flew out from Han Li's sleeves, transforming into 36 streaks of golden light that circled above his head. He cast several celestial techniques onto the swords in quick succession. The streaks of golden light tremored before immediately multiplying to form over 100 identical swords. The swords then dispersed and flew toward the barrier of light down below. An astonishing scene then ensued. All of the swords suddenly disappeared into thin air. He had set up an Oriate sword formation, which had encompassed this entire area. At this moment, Han Li suddenly raised a hand, and a yellow streak of light shot forth, circling in the air above the barrier of light before transforming into a monk staff that shimmered with a faint yellow light. He closed his eyes expressionlessly and made a hand seal as he began to chant in a low voice, injecting his power into the staff. The staff tremored gently before expanding drastically amid a ball of piercing yellow light. In the blink of an eye, it had transformed into a gargantuan staff that was over 100 feet in length and as thick as a water tank. Han Li's chanting came to a halt as he opened his eyes with a calm expression. He looked down at the film of light below him before rubbing his hands together, upon which a ball of 7-colored Buddhist light surfaced between his palms. He supported the ball of Buddhist light in one hand before hurling it through the air, where it struck the monk's staff in a flash. The staff was originally emanating yellow light when all of a sudden, an additional layer of 7-colored Buddhist light appeared around it. At the same time, the staff began to emit a low and forbidding ringing sound. "Go," Han Li commanded as he pointed a finger at the monk's staff. The gargantuan staff immediately came crashing down at his behest, striking the barrier of light with unerring accuracy. An earth-shattering boom erupted, and a thunderous burst could be heard throughout the entire underground cavern. The 5-colored barrier of light down below only managed to withstand the might of the monk's staff for a split second before being completely shattered. The shattered fragments of the vast barrier of light were reduced to specks of spiritual light before disappearing. After Han Li caught sight of the situation within the barrier of light, his expression stiffened before a peculiar look appeared on his face. However, he soon reverted back to his usual calm expression as he said, "Who would have thought that you two were merely putting on an act? How about I join you two as well? Otherwise, it would be quite a pity if you two didn't have any opponents." Beneath the barrier of light that had just been shattered, the gray-robed monk and the old woman were sitting on 2 huge rocks that were situated only around 100 feet away from one another. Both of them had their eyes tightly closed as they meditated in a seated position. In between the two of them, there was a strange mouse-like spirit beast that was only around the size of a fist. However, as its stomach inflated and deflated, bursts of thunderous booms rang out, making it sound as if 2 powerful cultivators were engaged in an intense battle. The gray-robed monk and this Madame Long hadn't been fighting at all. Instead, they were merely using the sounds created by this spirit beast to fool everyone outside of the restriction. The two of them immediately opened their eyes after the barrier of light was shattered by Han Li. Both of them directed their attention upward and were clearly surprised by the sight of Han Li that greeted them. At the same time, a green and yellow barrier of light settled over the two of them. Even though it was far smaller than the 5-colored barrier of light from before, it was still enough to encompass the two of them. At the center of the barrier of light, a semi-transparent embroidered cloth was slowly rotating. This barrier of light was being released by the cloth. "How could it be you?" The old woman's wrinkled face was etched with incredulity. The gray-robed monk also wore a similar expression. Han Li looked down at the new barrier of light and the embroidered cloth down below as a faint smile appeared on his face. Looks like you two have expended quite a lot of effort into this. To think that you would use a treasure to conceal your presence. Tusk. I was wondering why I was unable to see through a mere illusion technique with my bright-sight spirit eyes. It turns out that you two were hiding in here hatching a plot this entire time. I really do admire you two for your wisdom. Han Li was expression admiration with his words, but his expression suggested the contrary as a cold look appeared in his eyes. The gray-robed monk finally managed to compose himself and uttered a Buddhist prayer before saying, "As expected, you are indeed very powerful, fellow Taoist Han. Even the other 3 fellow Taoists were unable to capture you. Speaking of which, where are the other 3? Have they left the cave?" The monk cast his gaze around the cave as he spoke, and a hint of alarm welled up in his heart upon making the discovery that Master Arctic Dragon and the other 2 cultivators were nowhere to be found. He clearly didn't think that Han Li would have any chance of being able to kill the 3 of them on his own. Han Li narrowed his eyes and shook his head, then nodded his head. In the end, he heaved a long sigh but refrained from saying anything. The 2 people down below were rather perplexed. The old woman lost her patience first, and glowered up at Han Li as she grumbled, "HMPH, why are you putting on this cryptic act, fellow Taoist? If Master Arctic Dragon and the other 2 have already left the cave, then the 3 of us will have to break our way out as well. Otherwise, we'll be trapped once they summon more cultivators here from the North Night Palace. There's no need for you to worry about them. All 3 have died by my hands. Actually, Master Arctic Dragon left behind a nascent soul with me. Would you 2 like to see him one last time before I send you on your way as well?" Han Li asked coldly. The old woman was initially stunned by Han Li's words before an enraged expression appeared on her face as she asked, "You defeated Master Arctic Dragon. That's impossible. And what do you mean by send us on our way?" "Nothing much. I don't know what kind of relationship the 2 of you share, nor what intentions you're harboring, and I can't be bothered to consider those things now. However, what I do know is that you 2 left me here to fight the North Night Palace cultivators, yet you were plotting against me in the process. That's all I need to know. I detest nothing more than to be used by others. Furthermore, I don't want anyone else to know that I have the divine spirit treasures, so the 2 of you need to disappear from this world." Han Li's voice was absolutely implacable, and it was as if he were announcing their deaths already rather than delivering threats. After saying all that, he closed his eyes and ignored the 2 of them before making a hand seal while chanting in a low voice. The gray-robed monk and old woman both sensed spiritual chi fluctuations nearby, and they hurriedly looked around in bewilderment. Several hundred feet away, countless flashes of golden light appeared, following which strands of gold thread as thin as hair began to emerge. They flashed and moved with no rhyme nor reason, but all of them converging toward the center. They did so completely soundlessly, creating an extremely eerie and peculiar sight to behold. The old woman looked around before exclaiming, "It's a sword formation." The gray-robed monk's heart jolted, and he tried to repress his shock and suspicions toward Master Arctic Dragon's death as he yelled, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Brother Han, the 2 of us do not harbor any ill will toward you. There are countless North Night Palace cultivators outside the Spirit Void Halls right now. If they don't see Master Arctic Dragon emerging from this place, you won't be able to leave. What we should be doing now is to join forces to combat our common enemy. As for the divine spirit treasures, we can swear blood oaths to keep the matter a secret." Han Li chuckled in response. "There's no need for that. Dead people are much more reliable when it comes to confidentiality. Don't waste your words, Brother Moju. Look at the treasures behind him. With those things backing him up, there's no way he'd decide to comply with us." The old woman chuckled coldly as she flipped over her hand to produce her yellow cane. The monk faltered upon hearing that, and only then did he turn his attention to the humanoid puppet and the 5 skeletons behind Han Li, upon which his expression changed slightly. "What are those things and who's that man?" the monk asked. The old lady transmitted her voice to the monk as said, "Those skeletons are most likely the legendary Unbroken Sink Devils. As for that man, I don't recognize him either. He most likely managed to take Master Arctic Dragon by surprise and killed him using those things. Setting aside that other man for now, if those 5 skeletons really are the Unbroken Sink Devils that once belonged to Old Devil Kyan, then even if we join forces, we won't be a match for them. The only way for us to win is to finish this battle as quickly as possible by killing that Han brat. Those things won't be able to pose a threat to us once he's dead. For now, let's focus on breaking through this sword formation first. Otherwise, we'll be in big trouble once those 5 devils are released on us. Thankfully, Buddhist techniques can somewhat debilitate the 5 devils. Once the 5 devils strike, you'll have to be the one to hold them off. If all else fails, we'll use that thing we prepared for Master Arctic Dragon on him." The monk sighed as he transmitted his voice in response. "I guess we have no choice but to do that. This man doesn't use an ice attribute cultivation art, though, so that thing will be significantly less effective against him. It can't be helped. Thankfully, he's not a late nascent soul cultivator. Even if we can't kill him, it'll be a simple matter for us to inflict severe wounds upon him. We really have miscalculated this time. We received news in advance that this brat is very powerful and comparable in combat prowess to a late nascent soul cultivator, but I still didn't think he'd be this difficult to deal with. I was thinking that he would be able to exhaust Master Arctic Dragon before we swooped in to land the killing blow, but who would have thought that he would kill Master Arctic Dragon and remain largely unscathed? If I had known this was going to happen, I would have stayed out of this business." The old woman grumbled in a bitter voice. "It's too late to be thinking about these things now. If we can use that thing in exchange for a divine spirit treasure and the unbroken sink devils, it would be quite a bargain for us." The monk had also relinquished any efforts to try and appease Han Li. He looked around at the golden threads converging toward them, and his expression also darkened. At the same time, a dark and sinister energy arose from his body, in complete contrast with the benevolent facade he had put on earlier. Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D633, letter 212F, letter 212F, letter 1D464, letter 212F, letter 1D4B7, letter 1D450, letter 2134, letter 1D45A. The old woman was still grumbling under her breath, but she had also sprung into action. She tossed her cane into the air, and brilliant yellow light erupted, within which a yellow horse-like monster with vicious tusks materialized within. The monster spun around in the air at the old woman's behest before abruptly opening its mouth, blasting out countless streaks of yellow light which swept toward a certain direction. The streaks of light were countless miniature golden swords, each of which was around the size of a human hand. All of them were shimmering with light and appeared to be extremely sharp. Meanwhile, the monk joined his hands together before separating them again, upon which a ball of silver light appeared in each of his hands. He flung the balls of light into the air, and they expanded drastically, reaching the size of wagon wheels in the blink of an eye before hurtling toward the same direction. Han Li had already reopened his eyes as he stood in midair, and his expression remained calm at the sight of the oncoming attacks. He looked on as the miniature yellow swords and the 2 silver wheels crashed into the golden threads in quick succession, only to be reduced to scrap metal in an instant before clattering to the ground. What kind of sword formation is this? How can it be so vicious? Both the old woman and the monk drew a sharp breath in unison. They looked at one another to find their own shocked, horrified expression mirrored on the other's face. However, they certainly weren't just going to give up. The old woman flipped over her palm, and a blue rectangular brick-like ancient treasure appeared in her hand. She chanted something before hurling the brick through the air, upon which it drastically swelled to the size of a pavilion in the blink of an eye. It then flew into the distance with devastating force amid a burst of piercing blue light. The same thing happened again. The golden threads in the air flashed in unison, and the treasure was instantly sliced into countless pieces, disappearing into the distance like blue fireworks. The old woman's emotions finally got the better of her upon seeing that, and she exclaimed, "Impossible! My blue gold brick is refined from blue gold essence and it's near indestructible. How could it have been destroyed so easily?" The gray-robed monk's brows furrowed as he let loose low cry before abruptly pointing toward the inconspicuous mouse-like spirit beast. Gray light suddenly began to flow over the surface of the spirit beast's body, and its stomach was inflated to an incredible size. In the blink of an eye, it had swelled to several times its original size before it opened its pointy little mouth amid a dull pop. A burst of gray sound waves that were visible to the naked eye erupted violently from the spirit beast's mouth, creating a raging turbulent wave as it swept toward the golden threads. The monk's ability to think quickly under pressure was on full display. Seeing as treasures with substance were unable to break through this sword formation, he immediately thought of unleashing an insubstantial attack to bombard the formation. However, it was proclaimed in the Azure Essence sword art that once one mastered the Aureate sword formation, they would invincible in the human world. This statement was slightly leaning toward the side of hyperbole, and only half of the sword formation had been set up here, but it certainly still wasn't something that a mere burst of sound waves could destroy. The gray sound waves crashed into the golden threads, causing the latter to tremor slightly. However, a brilliant golden light then erupted, converging to form a massive golden sword that was roughly 10 feet in length. The sword lashed out at the gray sound waves like lightning, instantly vanquishing the latter with ease. The golden sword then reverted back to form strands of golden thread before continuing to converge toward their two targets. It was as if nothing had ever struck them, and their seemingly invincible might struck one with a sense of despair. The gray-robed monk's expression darkened significantly upon seeing this. This sword formation was far more powerful than they had anticipated. Han Li could see that his two opponents were stunned by the power of his sword formation, but never truly horrified, which made him rather wary as that suggested that they had trump cards with which they could use to turn the tables. At this moment, both of them produced several other treasures in an attempt to keep the sword projection at bay. Han Li's expression changed slightly, and faint spiritual light suddenly flashed from the body of the humanoid puppet behind him, upon which it disappeared on the spot. Moments later, the sword formation had converged to the extent that it was only just over 200 feet away from their two targets. The old woman and monk had even been forced to detonate ancient treasures. As a result, they were able to temporarily halt the golden threads in their advance, but were still unable to stop them altogether. A fearful expression finally appeared on the old woman's face. She turned toward the monk and urged, "We can't keep this up forever. I don't know what this sword formation is, but it definitely isn't going to be broken by any normal treasures. Hurry up and use that thing. It's the only thing that's powerful enough to destroy this formation." That thing will naturally be able to destroy this sword formation, but what are we going to use against that Han brat later? The gray-robed monk was still a little hesitant. We'll think about that later. We can only survive if we destroy this sword formation. Otherwise, once the sword formation converges completely, we'll be dead anyway and that thing will just go to waste. The old woman urged again. The monk's facial muscles spasmed slightly upon hearing that. He glanced at the approaching golden wires and finally gritted his teeth as he nodded. He immediately patted his storage pouch, upon which a peculiar object appeared in his hand. It was a fiery red ball that was about the size of a fist, and it was rather murky, making it impossible for anyone to identify exactly what it was. Furthermore, there was a gold and silver talisman plastered to the ball, and the monk was holding it with a very careful and solemn expression. The old woman was starting to panic at the sight of the converging golden threads, and she screeched, "We have to make haste, fellow Taoist Mo Jiu. If the sword formation gets too close, we'll be harmed by this thing's power as well." The monk sighed and reached out to tear off the talisman on the red ball in preparation to use it. However, right at this moment, a faint burst of silver light flashed behind the monk, and a humanoid figure emerged from within. It moved in a completely soundless manner as if it were a ghostly wraith, and the monk was completely oblivious to its arrival. However, the old woman standing across from him immediately caught sight of the silent assailant, and she cried in a panicked voice, "Look out! Behind you!" As she let loose her cry of warning, a streak of yellow light shot forth from her sleeve, directly toward the humanoid figure. The monk's heart jolted with shock upon hearing his companion's warning cry, and he immediately tried to get away. At the same time, he reflexively cradled his arm inward, trying to stow the ball away into his sleeve. However, he was too late. The humanoid figure that had appeared behind him was none other than Han Li's humanoid puppet, which possessed power comparable to a late nascent soul cultivator. Its body flashed through the air, and it rammed one hand toward the monk's back while reaching out with the other hand toward the red ball. Its movements were as fast as lightning, and the monk uttered a muffled groan as he stumbled away. The humanoid puppet's hand was aimed directly at his vital regions, and was able to easily pierce through the layer of light that was shielding his body. However, just as the puppet's hand made contact with his back, the projection of a strange, entirely pitch-black bird suddenly emerged. Even though the puppet's hand was still able to pierce through the projection with ease, it was slowed down ever so slightly in the process, affording the monk the split second required to avoid a lethal wound. Even so, he was still afflicted by a long gash on his shoulder, from which blood was gushing profusely. Meanwhile, just as the puppet's other hand was about to reach the crimson ball, the latter suddenly detached itself from the monk's hand and flew toward the old woman. Furthermore, the yellow streak of light that the old woman had hurled through the air was already upon the puppet. It was a thin, yellow needle that was flashing with light. Purple light erupted from the humanoid puppet's eyes, and it made no attempt to evade the needle. All of a sudden, the arm reaching for the red ball tremored violently amid a crisp crack. The arm detached itself from the puppet's body and caught up to the ball in the blink of an eye. The ball was cradled up by the hand before instantly being carried away. Almost at the exact same time, the yellow needle struck the humanoid puppet on the head, creating a dull explosion amid a flurry of yellow light. No. Yes. Two contrasting cries, one furious and one elated, escaped the mouths of the monk and the old woman respectively. The monk's crimson ball had been wrested away from him, so he was naturally shocked and enraged. Meanwhile, the old woman was ecstatic upon seeing the magic treasure she had refined for hundreds of years strike their assailant right in a vital region. The humanoid puppet stumbled back several steps before barely managing to arrest its momentum. It stood up straight once again and turned to appraise the old woman with a cold expression. There was a small hole around the diameter of a thumb puncturing right through its glabella, but the hole completely healed in the blink of an eye, leaving behind not even a single trace to suggest that the puppet had ever been harmed. The old woman was flabbergasted upon seeing this. However, she then suddenly sensed something as she screeched, "My yellow plum needle! What did you do to my yellow plum needle?" The humanoid puppet slowly raised a hand to reveal the thin yellow needle hovering over its palm. The needle was darting around desperately, trying to escape from its captor, but it had been sealed firmly within a ball of silver light and was unable to get away. The old woman's face paled significantly upon seeing this. She opened her mouth and was just about to say something, when the humanoid puppet suddenly rubbed its hands together. Piercing silver light immediately erupted from between its hands, and the yellow needle immediately dimmed as it lost its spiritual nature. The old woman let loose an anguished cry before throwing up several mouthfuls of blood essence in quick succession, as if she had been severely wounded. The monk wore a thunderous expression on his face, and he didn't have time to tend to the wound on his shoulder as he abruptly raised both hands up in the air. Countless balls of silver light that were roughly the size of fists surged forth in a frenzy from his hands. The sound of howling winds and claps of thunder could be indistinctly heard as they were released, creating a rather formidable sight to behold. However, Han Li merely chuckled coldly as he looked down from above. The humanoid puppet made a hand seal at his behest, and brilliant silver light erupted from its body. The light then receded, and it disappeared on the spot. The balls of silver light all struck empty air and amounted to absolutely nothing. The monk and the old woman looked at one another, and both of them could see the despair in each other's eyes. At this point, the sword formation was only about 70 to 80 feet away from them. There was nothing more that they could do. And Li hovered high in the air with his hands clasped behind his back, looking down at the two of them with a cold expression. The aureate sword formation finally completely converged, and the countless golden threads formed a massive golden ball of light in the end. A burst of loud explosions erupted from within the ball initially, causing the ball to tremor slightly. However, this was soon followed by the anguished cries of the old woman and the monk. Using his bright-sight spirit eyes, Han Li could see that the two mid-nascent soul cultivators had been instantly shredded by the sword formation. Their nascent souls lasted a while longer than their physical bodies, but they were also unable to withstand the sustained assault from so many golden threads and disappeared from this world as specks of green light. As for their storage pouches and treasures, all of them had been completely eradicated by the might of the sword formation. There were only two small balls of glacial flames left hovering in the air, one of which was yellow while the other was green. And Li heaved a faint sigh, and a rather lonesome expression appeared on his face. Following a brief silence, a burst of silver light suddenly flashed beside him before the humanoid puppet soundlessly emerged, handing over the crimson ball it had snatched to Han Li. Han Li accepted the ball wordlessly and began to carefully examine it. Upon close examination, he could see that the ball was semi-transparent with a ball of piercing red flames tumbling within. He looked even closer to find that it was a miniature firebird flapping its wings inside the ball. The firebird was extremely lifelike and quite mesmerizing to behold. There were also runes of all types of colors flashing around the firebird, and upon closer inspection, Han Li discovered that those runes were all some type of pseudo-ancient language. Even with Han Li's vast knowledge in ancient texts, he was still unable to decipher the etymology of these runes. It seemed to be a completely brand new type of primordial text. And Li examined the runes for a long time with furrowed brows. Seeing as this treasure was the ultimate trump card that the two of them had been banking on, it clearly had to be an extremely powerful item. The ball did indeed appear to be quite mysterious, and seemed to be imbued with an immense amount of fire attribute spiritual power. However, It would be an absolute joke to think that such a pitiful amount of spiritual power could break through his aureate sword formation. As such, the true might of this treasure had to be somehow related to those runes. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to identify even a single one of them, let alone try to understand them. It clearly wasn't the time to be conducting thorough research, so, after a moment of contemplation, Han Li produced a few more talismans from his storage pouch and plastered them to the ball. He then pulled out a special wooden box and carefully placed the ball into it. He was going to keep it for later usage. After doing all that, Han Li turned toward the Qilin silhouette to find that it had already shrunk quite noticeably. In contrast, the fire raven flapping its wings within the silhouette was extremely vigorous, and its body had grown by roughly a third of its original size. Han Li stroked his chin with a contemplative look upon seeing that. He didn't hurry to withdraw this wisp of true flame. Instead, he made a hand seal and began to chant something. All of a sudden, over 100 bursts of golden light surfaced from the air down below. Most of them dissipated on their own, leaving only 36 miniature golden swords behind. Han Li waved a sleeve through the air indifferently, upon which the swords flew into his sleeve like a river of golden light. Finally, he turned his gaze toward the two small balls of glacial flames. The balls of glacial flames were completely rooted to the spot, while emanating a faint glow, appearing to be entirely unremarkable in every way.